Welcome, worldographers and world builders alike, to episode 6 of The World Hammer, where I read lore from across the multiverse and perhaps yours. All the entries seen here are submitted by talented writers from our Tovia Discord community based on a daily prompt project called Build Together and tagged for World Hammer. If you would like your own works read aloud, you are not only welcome, but encouraged to join our Discord and submit your own. Now back to the Forge to see what's been built. For day 383, the prompt was, are there any unique cattle in your world? And this came from Predwin the Great in the Discord. Predwin the Great writes, Regrikruki, Reggies/Reginas, an entry in What Lies West. Regrikruk, the common tongue would have it said, big green bug, but we call them Reggies. They're good eats, and good cargo haulers if you want to avoid the stench of reek sheep. I've been in and out of some bars in the City of Worms that serve Reggie meat, and it certainly smells good. I'll have to try it proper someday. Crozer, firstborn of Jozar, adventurer. Call signs, high canyon lily population, chirps, smell of many flowers, tracks. Regrikruki, plural, are monsters of the west that reside within its region, the devastated mesas. Their name, Dwarven for big green bug, will be swapped out for the common term used by adventurers, Reggies. Reggies are large, pill-bug-shaped beasts with hard, copper-lined shells and a dense inner network of chitin that protects them from many of their predators. Adult Reggies get to be as large as 13 to 16 feet tall, depending on the gender of the Reggie in question. Female Reggies are sometimes, though not always, called Reginas. A Reggie's face is heavily obscured by their dense armor, which forms a lip over their eyes, making it impossible for an adult Reggie to look up and see anything. Speaking of the face, a Reggie possesses an extremely unnatural one for an insect. A Reggie has 2 binocular eyes with black sclera and blue irises and pupils that glow dimly in the dark. Their tongue, which is twice the length of their body, 10 to 12 feet, is covered in tiny, dry hairs used to reach into the cups of canyon lilies and sup their nectar in repetitive slurps. Moving up, the shell of a Reggie, Reginald if one feels fancy, is covered in spikes, too large to harm the average person, but perfect for dissuading aerial attackers such as plague wings or bow-eyed birds. Reggies are very calm creatures, and many of them have been taken back to the City of Worms to serve as cattle, pack mules, companions, and of course resources such as meat and chitin. Reggies are quiet creatures, with their lack of vocal cords leaving them completely silent other than the quick chirps of their rear legs scraping their shell as a call. Residents of the City of Worms throw an annual Reggie show where the biggest and most beautiful bugs are shown off for a cash prize. Sometimes the Reggies are then sold for meat, but many owners keep them out of love for their company. Combat against a Reggie in an unprepared setting is a difficult game. Their hard shells and resistance to magic makes them hardy opponents. Strikes to the face are difficult, but work the best to felling any Reggie that, let's be honest, you pick to fight with. Their tongues, thin as they are effective whips that can lacerate flesh, though wearing any amount of armor will probably keep one safe. Reggies are prized prey for larger creatures of the mesas. True wyverns, in particular, are an impossible-to-escape foe for Reggies, though luckily their rarity means that the population isn't in any danger. Alright, I like these big guys. They make me think of a cricket/beetle creature with this long tongue. I don't quite have the optics in my head of how the tongue works out with the rest of it, but I like this idea a lot. I love big, giant insectoid things. I need to do a little bit more of this in my own world building at some point, because I know that Predwin has been pretty good at these. He's had a few of these in a few different places and different settings, and they're all very compelling. I like them a lot. Giant bug creatures. And I like that these are one of the more friendly things that we can find in What Lies West, a little bit less likely to really mess us up. For day 384, the prompt was, are there any unique kinds of scarring in your world? What causes it? And this comes from Nugget in the Discord. Carhop writes, Meisel marked, an entry in Restress. A soldier's musings overheard in a medical tent. I'd rather have lost both arms than suffer that poor man's fate. We were fighting on opposite sides of the conflict, but gods old and new, I'd have to be missing a heart to celebrate his misery. You ever hear the screams of a mycelium strangled throat turning back to flesh? Watched an eyeball made of mushrooms dissolve to jelly, while its owner feels every nerve dissolve? Makes me thankful the axe that took my arm was just plain steel. Medic should have just let the poor man die, I say. It's a miracle he was even able to purge the fungus before it reached his brain, get into his eyes and all that. Though the spore-borne plague is highly lethal and all-consuming, there exists a small window between initial infection and the beginning of the victim's end. That is to say, if the mycelial network created by the zygote fungus have yet to reach the brain or heart, the victim can be restored to health. However, because the parasitic fungus works with such speed, it is simply not possible to stop the spread before it starts. As is known, the fungus hyphae and mycelium begin their work of replacing tissue from the site of contact, completing the transformation within 24 hours depending on the location. This process creates intense bruising and hairline tears in the flesh from the mycelial networks bulging against the skin as they must fully encompass internal tissues to dissolve them before replacing them. This is made all the worse by the body being rapidly drained of fluids to fuel the fungus's rapid growth stage. It is because of these factors that any host who is healed through either magic or salve is left with deforming scars which show the pathways the mycelium took in its attempted forced symbiosis. Individuals bearing these scars are colloquially known as the mycel-marked and tend to be treated with a certain level of fear, disdain, or in some cases reverence throughout the various communities of Restris. Most of them are left permanently altered, mentally, scarred from the trauma, feeling their intrinsic sense of self being replaced by something sinister and primordial. Some can still hear the voice of the fungus in their quieter moments and can project it to others, while some have their vision briefly stolen and replaced with a field of thermal energy and the electrical pulses between living beings above and below the soil. Others find themselves able to commune with plant life, hearing the songs of ferns and lichens in the forests or the droning hum of the trees. A smaller population of the mycel-marked are even capable of seemingly disappearing into the fungal networks around them and reappearing hundreds of feet away. Whatever the case, it is clear the mycel-marked are left with a fragment of the primordial energy carried by the zygote fungus. This primordial remnant is thought by many occultists and other researchers to be a weakened version of the fungus, forced into perfect symbiosis with the host rather than being fully destroyed. Some of Restris's most historic figures belong under the mycel-marked umbrella. It is rumored that Ryzen the Mad was marked, though many historians refute that claim and insist his madness was born from the firmamental tear set in his crown. Certain occultist sects hold that Kulasbu Dumu is a mycel-marked druid whose mother was a hag. It is commonly held that General Crasp was mycel-marked also, a result of a failed assassination by agents of the cult of the Charred Bark. It would seem the indwelling of the primordial remnant creates a great destiny for the mycel-marked. Whether that greatness be for the world's benefit or doom, however, must be determined by the host themselves. Really cool stuff to have in such a fungal-focused world. I don't know if I knew anything about these. Maybe this was a new creation of yours, Carhop, but I had not heard anything about these, but I like this a lot, this mycel-marked concept. You get the vibes of a little bit more of a darker toned concept of a chosen one, kind of, or someone spared an awful fate to then take upon a more holy or a greater mantle, or maybe a more evil, sinister mantle. I can imagine the markings really easily too, and it is unpleasant. The Wanderer writes, Silicone tree burns, an entry in Forest Kingdom. All across the galaxy, almost without exception, save for the PFL world's spiritual regions that ban augmentation, and rarely in the Starkling Empire, you can find people with scars that resemble brands with smaller branching scars. Some places are rarer, nearly non-existent, but it's around. These scars are all around augmentation, specifically mechanical ones. Its cause is quite simple, these augmented limbs being overcharged. The reasons why varies significantly, but quite often, especially in wealthier communities, can be seen as a reason for shame. Unfortunately, the most common reason is poorly made augmentations, whether they be from cheap materials, shoddily made, incomparable parts, or simple corner cutting. Their batteries can either burst, jetting the excess energy into the entire limb, electrically scarring and heat scarring along the metal and flesh. If the power grid has an overflow, this can also cause this, or simply charging them too long. About as many reasons exist as scars, and while most don't have these problems, cheap products have them, and the slimier the dealer, the often easier to break the product. However, poor augmentations are not the only reason. Soldiers using augmentations might fall victim to an AEP, anti-electrical pulse. It's just a focused EMP with some shield bypassing effects. These will destroy machines and overcharge augmentations, quite often prosthetic limbs or brain enhancers, and ships. Also, charging stations might be sabotaged to flare into unsuspecting people charging their mechanical parts. Furthermore, someone might choose to temporarily overclock their augmentations for their effects, whether it be for combat effectiveness, as an improvised bomb, or to find a way out. All are options. The scars got their name from the tree-like pattern of the scars and the fact that a lot of tech uses silicone. I'm imagining the feeling of metal in my body that is been overcome with too much electricity and is now arcing into me, and that is a horrible thought. Kendamarania writes, missing person case, an entry in City of Woe. Shucks, door's locked. You really expected this guy to leave his apartment wide open? Yeah, you're right. We should try knocking it down. Looks pretty weak. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Aroth and Ermaziel slammed their bodies against the shoddy door, crashing it and falling into the apartment. After recovering, they could smell a sour odor reeking of ammonia and blood coming from the kitchen. Oh, gosh. When was the last time this person showered? Ermaziel groaned while pinching her nose. That's not stink, it's rot, Aroth clarified while clearing the floor, which was covered corner to corner with rubbish and trash. Lit up by their flashlights, the detectives could see various different paintings hanging all over the walls, abstract and smeared by brushstrokes, with some art supplies laying on the floor. Quite a connoisseur, isn't he? Yeah, Ermaziel gazed at each in awe. Mr. Jensen? We didn't mean to intrude. A friend of yours, Rania, just asked us to check up on you, since you haven't contacted her in a month. The two continued down the filthy hallway, more and more pieces of art and stray paint stains getting in the way. Each of these paintings had their motifs associated with them as noted by Aroth. Dismembered corpses, fire, mangled images of the brain and mind, tree roots, and above all, screaming. The other rooms, including the bathroom and his bedroom, were buried under a mountain of trash, old clothes, and bottles of alcohol. Can see why the neighbors outside said they never trust this guy. Reclusiveness leads to this sort of stuff, Aroth muttered, trying to mask the pungent smell with his cigarette. Ermaziel passed along the cigarette and took a drag. But his art certainly is a feat, wouldn't you think? Equally beautiful and yet terrifying. An old radio hummed the tune while they followed the trail of food and bottles to the kitchen. Mr. Vigo, Jensen, sir, Rania needed to see you again. Oh, Christ! Aroth almost belched inside his mouth when he saw the corpse. No, the remnants of Vigo sitting on a small wooden chair and asleep on a table with nearly a dozen beer and whiskey bottles on it. What can only be described as organic roots were growing out of his body, crimson red against the monochrome world of hell. These roots were also growing from the inside of his mouth. Oh, no. Ermaziel's eyes widened as she nearly dropped the flashlight from her hand. He's not rotting, is he? Aroth approached Vigo's body and examined his blank white eyes, characteristic of all sinners like him. No, he's completely comatose, already hit stage 5 of hellish decay. The roots have already begun to grow out of him. He pointed at the breakage point along Vigo's spine, which extruded out of his cloth tank top. Aroth shone a flashlight into his mouth. He probably had his first death on Earth from alcohol poisoning. Worms can be seen in his throat from when he hit stage 2. Poor bastard, left to decompose here. Ermaziel tapped 2 of her fingers at the side of his neck and checked his pulse. His heart is still beating. He's alive. Can't we aid him back to health? He shook his head. That's not how decay works down here, Dolly. This is hell's own way of punishing everyone that resides here, feeding off everyone's sins as it claims your body back. Those roots are just how it's physically seen by us who aren't affected yet. It's mostly mental. It terminates memories and loses sensibility and sanity while causing unforeseen pain and paralysis. When it reaches this stage, it's always permanent. He's conscious and alive, yes, but unreactive. Ermaziel held onto Vigo's hand as he groaned in a low voice. That doesn't make sense. None of this does. Nothing makes sense down here. Aroth patted her shoulder. We don't even know what causes all this. It's just falling back to old habits, falling back to the easy way out when despair hits, or just giving up entirely. Seems he fell back into the bottle. He took a drag out of his cigarette and buried it on Vigo's ashtray. And I suppose those paintings back there were just how Vigo made sense of it all, and the alcohol was how he coped with the pain, she sighed. What should we tell the client? That he's gone for good, Aroth murmured. Come on, the most mercy we can give him is to dispose of him into the phlegathon. He won't experience pain there. You get the arms, and I'll get the legs. Yeah. The angels lifted up Vigo's arms to reveal what was hiding underneath. A final painting that he could conjure up while the decay overtook him. A portrait of their client Rania, a good friend, who looked for him as he became missing for a month and the last remaining memories he had of his life on Earth. She took the painting and held it under her arm, saving it until they returned to the office to bear the news. You don't think the neighbors will mind at all? Aroth grunted. Please, stuff like this happens every other week in Corpi. Man, this also feels kind of fungal in a weird way, especially out of the spine and mouth. It kind of has this cordyceps fungi vibe, but it's this idea of a mental anguish. It's very dark, very depressing. This one is sad. I feel bad for Rania here, our friend, sort of going mad all by himself. This one is very bleak. Nugget writes, Error 404, Flesh Not Found, an entry in Time Traveler and the Immortal. The gods are capable and expected to be able to heal seamlessly from any injury. As long as their soul is intact and they have access to stardust, they can return from anything, even injuries dealt by other gods. There are two exceptions to this. Their death scarring are still usually visible upon reincarnation, but are more comparable to birthmarks than actual scars. Mors, who was dismembered, is still able to take apart his limbs after death. Ignis, who died of hyperthermia, still has blackened limbs to reflect the frostbite they died with, etc. The other is far less forgivable, injuries sustained after death that they are unable to heal from. As of currently, there is only one thing known to be capable of causing such injury to the divine, the primordial gods. Time still has bright red Lichtenberg scarring from when Chaos tried to kill them. And Mors, whose eye was cut out by Aurelius at the beginning of the war, he's still able to see through the severed eye, but what's more interesting is the void-like scarring across the rest of their face. Quite simply, the reason they can't heal from that is because that part of their face just doesn't exist anymore. Where it once was, you simply see through to empty space. So the primordial gods are a lot of the main god characters that we're facing, right? Time, Chaos, Mors, these sort of entities are the primordials. All of the others are gone, thanks to Aurelius, I believe, right? Trying to make sure I get the sort of hierarchy of beings correct here. So in reality, these primordial gods can only cause these sort of really, really crazy damaging things to one another. And I like this theming. It's like these ancient immortal entities that are gods that still kind of bear all of the strongest scars from the biggest conflicts and the biggest altercations that they've experienced in their lifetimes. For day 385, the prompt was, how do communities share information within themselves in your world? And this comes from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. Kendamarania wrote, Hellion Cant, an entry in City of Woe. Hellion Cant is an argot developed from Corpai's criminal underworld and is used heavily amongst seedy types such as gangsters, succubi, blank skinners, pirates, burglars, corrupt politicians, and hustlers all over Corpai. Much of it is nonsense to any outsiders because of its complicated lexicon, nonsensical semantics, and deceptively simple phonology. However, it is designed to be understood by any sinner, demon, or angel, no matter what tongue. History. Hellion Cant doesn't have a clear origin, but it is clear that it developed around the 1900s following the growth of Corpai. It's theorized that it began as immigrants from the Asphodelian territories began to flock into the city. In more prototypical Cant, it's shown that it used more slang, typical in sailors' talk and common euphemisms. However, it's always been apparent that it had influences from languages like British English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Arabic, Urdu, and Mandarin. Initially, demon criminals were reluctant to accept sinners' tongues into Hellion Cant. However, whether intentionally or not, by 1919, foreign languages were regularly used as loanwords. At the end of the Sinners' War, Hellion Cant developed to include languages like German, Japanese, Russian, Dutch, Yiddish, Swahili, and Italian due to the endings of World War I, the Spanish flu, and various conflicts and events in the interwar years. With more sinners being sent to hell due to World War II and surrounding conflicts, Hellion Cant continually evolved with the shifting political and economic tides of hell, with organizations like the Mani Malvagi and Blank Sinners regularly speaking it alongside many other criminals in Corpai's underbelly. It is frequently employed in order to hide criminal dealings and contracts, although about 35% of the whole population is at least passingly familiar with it to understand a conversation, almost making it a local dialect. I really feel like you took the idea of Thieves' Cant that I've seen before and fleshed it out really well for a custom setting in a way that feels way more integrated and way more realistic and fleshed out. I like this a lot. I think that this Hellion Cant idea is super cool, and I'm tempted to kind of take some inspiration from this and make something very similar for my own sort of underground group in Atobia. But we'll see. For day 386, the prompt was, are there any creatures widely feared by mortals in your setting? Why are they such? And this comes from Probin the Great in the Discord. Probin the Great writes, Fogmen, an entry in What Lies West. They're distant croaks, communicating with each other in primal language. That's what scars me. Knowing that somewhere out there, just beyond the fog, an 18-foot-tall swamp humanoid is waiting for me or my team to mess up. Then, you hear the lumbering footsteps of a giant, the ripping cries of a tree forced from the ground, the heaving breath of a behemoth that smells prey. Then, against the grey fog, you see it, a pale shadow cast from the hiding tyrant's sun, a hungry giant wielding a tree like a sword. Then, when you finally get a good look, it's a roiling mass of eyes and teeth, countless mouths zigzagging up the monster's torso, acidic saliva pulling under the ground and singeing the earth. Harold Green, an adventurer. Monster call signs: frog-like croaks, heavy footsteps, often heard from half a mile away, smell of rotting fish, increased eldritch and arcane power in area. The Fogmen are monsters of the West that only inhabit the fog-coated region of the Creeping Peninsula. A frogman possesses the same silhouette as a human, though they have far larger shoulders and necks to support their heads. Fogmen average at 16 feet tall, though elders may reach upwards of 20 if well fed. Across their bodies, a single massive mouth stretches vertically up and down a fogman's chest, with numerous bright green glowing eyes lining the lips of the mouth. Two larger compound eyes sit at the fogman's head, giving it complete area vision. The hands of a fogman are extremely calloused from years of scratching themselves, starting out as bloody wounds and hardening into rock-hard scabs. These hands are used to grip and pull the small trees of the region out of the ground, used for territorial displays or fights, and to kill their prey. Despite what one would think, the trees have adapted to this constant assailment from the fogmen and are now reliant on being displaced to spread their seeds. The skin of a fogman is a light grayish-blue, which closely matches the hue of the fog within the Creeping Peninsula. This allows fogmen to remain still when their prey approaches them from the same angle as the sun, sitting in wait until their meal gets close enough to notice them, close enough for it to be far too late. In combat, fogmen are smart enough to recognize and prioritize spellcasters and sharpshooters, bashing and killing any hooded, staff-wielding members of a party first to weaken the rest. This doubles as part of their dietary needs, as arcane power keeps their eldritch energy from overpowering their body and consuming them. Thus, fogmen may retreat with the corpse of one or two mages as a suitable hunt. Clerics of Orpheus, though, are particularly sought after by fogmen, as the light of Orpheus is far more powerful a force against eldritch energy. Some particularly smart fogmen have learned to cripple a cleric of Orpheus instead of eating them, dragging the cleric to the beast's den and keeping them to repetitively cast healing spells on them to hold back their corruption. Though, as one knows, being crippled and lost within the West is the first stage to becoming a mutant. When fighting a fogman, shielding casters and smaller members of a party is paramount, as fogmen aren't in the fight to kill an entire party, only to feed themselves. If they cannot safely secure a kill, they may retreat, or worse. If they can manage to grab a party member, only the fastest of adventurers can keep up with a fogman running off with their meal. Fogmen prey upon maws, low-flying plaguewings, screechers, young inverters, mimics, lone bathka that stray from the void dunes, warp beasts, arcanosaurs, mutants such as ghouls or gnolls, and reek sheep. They are only preyed upon by other eldritch spawns such as charnel wyverns, stray above-ground abominations, and other larger fogmen. I really want to see one of these things. They sound really fascinating. I get this oblong, twisted kind of looking feel from just the descriptions that we've had and the quote at the beginning that makes them sound very unsettling, very nasty. I also really like the thoroughness that we are getting from What Lies West when it comes to sort of the ecosystem at play. The food chain seems to be well fleshed out and rather interesting. These chunks at the end where it talks about, what preys on what are kind of always kind of fun to me. I like this addition a lot. Thank you, Predwin. The Wanderer writes, "Can we burn them with fire and entry in Forest Kingdom?" The Forest Kingdom's capital world, also called the Forest Kingdom, has 6 moons, one of which is a vast desert. Galgoom, specifically, an unfortunately common creature, there is the sand crawler, desert vampires, crawler sycoms, or as the Starkling Empire recently dubbed them, big ol' scorpions. They're 4 foot long, 4 foot tall, counting their tail and stinger, 4-eyed creatures. They're arthropod-esque and have a large stinger, 4 clawed legs, and 2 much smaller crabbing legs. They hold a scary sting, being able to pierce through most things not reinforced with space metal. But it won't kill you. In fact, the venom has actually been used to cure and treat a lot of wounds to great success in a medical environment. However, the venom also disables your body's ability to expel and effectively use water. This leads to overhydration, although the venom actually has a lot of electrolytes in them, so some of the side effects don't show up till much later than would be normal. Eventually, victims either die of dehydration despite their mass consumption of water, or simply get strong enough brain fog that the crawlers will finish them off. They'll then drink their blood, carry them to their nest, and consume the flesh gradually. Thankfully, there is an easily made antidote to the venom, provided you are able to get to civilization. The crawlers themselves are scary enough to the average person, however they hunt in packs and live in nests, though some turning into colonies. And due to they themselves being omnivores, those colonies rarely die out naturally. The largest colony known is a mega one having an estimated billion inside it. This is only sustainable due to the subterranean lake network their colony is built on, which grows enough fauna to keep their population sustained. Further allowing this is that the crawlers can both reproduce quickly and rarely asexually. Efforts to ascertain whether or not glassing the colony from orbit should be taken, although concerns about massive ecosystem changes has caused some hesitation before glassing a 16th of the world. The Grand Nest Expedition 1. Hey, don't forget to strap in the false veins. We wouldn't want them to think we're not really dead, would we? Varisi said. She finished strapping into her false life suit. If this worked, the crawlers would assume they had been stung and passed out. Fake veins would convince them that they were dead. Getting dragged in was, after all, one of the safest ways to get into the center of a nest. And while drones were excellent at scanning areas, deep subterranean lakes and tunnels made long-range signals fuzzy, and the lead scientists at Galgoom wouldn't authorize any wide-scale eradication efforts on fuzzy data. You'd think they'd be sending in more of the Legion to scout this out before sending us in, Grun said. After all, it's not like they'd be looking to eat them. Grun, did you not pay any attention in orientation? Pinder said. Yeah, I know. They all got broken, but still, putting a robot in a meat suit seems smarter than putting a person in one. Besides, the desert vampires can smell fear, Grun said. Really? You're listening to the old wives' tales about them, Varisi said. The same ones that say their eyes glow, that they steal your soul, and that they're some kind of hive mind? Yeah, shaking in my boots here. Look, they have slightly above average noses. They might beat a Nari like me in the nose department, but they lose to a lot of other species. They can't smell you over the artificial bodies. You'll be fine. Grun seemed somewhat relieved for a moment and finished suiting up. A few minutes later, the ship had landed. Now began the hike. In terms of deserts, the canyon their nest was in was beautiful, a perfect spot to walk in, even shaded. As planned, it wasn't long before they got spotted by a crawler. Soon, 3 revealed themselves to go gather the crew. As instructed, they pretended to run away and let themselves get stung. Grun was hit first. Adrenaline had clearly gotten the better of him, and he had it reenact a punching bag with its face. It ran off. Pinder was next. It got him in the back and scurried off, fearful of Grun's violence. Varisi got stung last, on the back of the knee. To her unpleasant shock, she felt a slight prick, and on top of her fake flesh, actually bled. In response to this, she pulled out her gun and shot it through the face, killing it. Whoa, trigger happy much? Grun teased. It got through, Varisi replied. Pinder and Grun helped her patch the wound and the suit. She was for sure leaving a complaint about the suits in her report. Upon repairing, they took off again. An hour later, they were just outside of the nest. They sent in their last check-in with the ship and dropped down to play dead. They shut off outside sounds, and for 20 minutes, they held conversations with each other. Pinder fell asleep for the last 5 of them. Eventually, though, they got found. The creatures bit down on the artificial veins and drank till they went dry, then began carrying them. Grun was being carried by 4 of them, and had to remind himself that he was fine, and they weren't gross bugs. Varisi was feeling dehydrated and drank, and began following training for slow, consistent sips of water. As they entered the entry tunnel, an old wives' tale was proven true. In their nests, at least, their eyes glowed red. Nope, I'm not sticking around in here with that, Grun shouted. He wrestled free and began sprinting out of the cave. He had nearly a dozen crawlers after him in a minute. Was heard on the comms as he likely tripped. Varisi and Pinder had to grit their teeth as they heard him scream for a few seconds. Grun? Pinder asked. Grun, are you there? Are you alive? There wasn't a response, nor would there be. Varisi tried contacting the ship to evac, but got static. They were alone in their mission now. The crawlers left them near a pile of mummified corpses. All manner of local fauna was found. Really, anything close to a desert crawler in size or larger was found. They were left alone. Pinder set up the relay station. Any future expeditions could use this to assist in recharging tech, accessing food and water, and recording data. In the meanwhile, Varisi set up the drones. Neither of them spoke as they did their work. A quiet morning was in place. They quietly cataloged the supplies. 6 drones, 2 flyers, 2 crawlers, and 2 diving ones. Each had a handgun with enough charge to kill at least 600 of the crawlers, and Pinder had access to the flame storage, 3 large containers of condensed plasma. One of those canisters could keep a flamethrower lit for a day. This was to intimidate the crawlers on the evacuation plan. 3 canisters. There was going to be one for each of them. Grun was meant to bring the lab construction kit. That wouldn't happen anymore. The 2 of them soldiered on. Varisi flew the drones around the colony, scanning as she went until she found the nest itself. at least where hundreds of eggs were being laid, and oddly, carried off. Warry followed the eggs with the drone and found they were taking them to one of the lakes. There they collected mud and... Warry had to do a double take. They were burying the eggs into the wall, surrounding them in mud, and then doing the same, leaving the entire interior of the wall to have a layer of egg and clay. Upon relaying this, Pinder carved open the nearby wall. Sure enough, there were eggs there. The entire nest was a giant layer of eggs. Pinder nearly vomited as further exploration was done. This was found to be the case in every artificial wall of the nest. One of the crawlers spotted the drone and grew annoyed enough that it stung it. 2 hours later, the next one did so. By the first day, they all were. Warry had to refill her water tank. In the 7 hours present, 4 liters was probably a bit much, but hey, she was thirsty. As she woke up from her sleep shift, her head hurt and she was shivering. She wasn't sure why she was cold. It should be a nice warm temperature inside her suit, and it was, but she felt cold. As they began to walk out of the hive, flamethrowers at the ready, they got spotted. The flames worked wonders to keep the crawlers at a distance. However, as they were entering a large cave before the entrance, a crawler jumped from the ceiling and managed to kill Pinder. It bit onto Pinder's side and twisted itself to sting continually in a circle. Pinder screamed for a few seconds, but stopped quickly. To Pinder's credit, the bag was given to Warry. Warry stuffed 2 of the canisters against a large pillar, no doubt housing thousands of crawler eggs. As she ran out, she shot the canister. The cave was engulfed in immense flames. She was thrown out of the tunnel, the pretense of a false body burning away as the entire cave was scorched. Warry called in the ship, feeling the desert shift around its weight under her. As she made her way away from the nest, that miniature inferno, she found the rock underneath her gave way to let her sleep. A very needed sleep. As she drifted off, a realization hit. She hydrated a little more until her water ran dry. That was rationed for 2 days, and she had taken it in 1. Warry forced herself up, starting to climb, but couldn't find any way out of the canyon. She radioed one more time before drifting to sleep. She felt as if something bit her, but no pain was attached. She could feel the ground under her move, but she was too tired to care. When a bright light shone above her, she didn't care. When the sound of laser fire was near her, she didn't care. When someone picked her up and moved her, she only cared that it got more comfy. She was asleep, and that's all that mattered. Nice, we got a really long entry from the Wanderer, and this was kind of cool. My only thing that I was confused about is she knew that the stinger got through. Was she just muscling through, or... Because aren't they researchers, or maybe they're not? Maybe that's maybe they're just operatives and they don't really know what's going to happen, but they have the life suits. So I was a little confused about, why they didn't immediately abandon the operation. I guess the operation might be too important. But I really liked this. We had some great dialogue that felt like good banter, good bouncing off different characters here. And I like these scorpion guys and this idea of this nest being far more colossal internally than they would have thought, and being sort of like this oh crap moment of everything in here is like lined with millions of eggs. XanderShroom writes, the Sontairi. Sontairi, also known as the first sirens, are creatures that represent everything that one would fear of the sea. They prefer larger prey and binge when they eat, as they themselves are already large creatures. They hunt any sort of creature, but enjoy luring land creatures the most, though they are known to hunt other, more modern sirens, but are also known to cannibalize each other for individual survival. They blend into kelp forests and prefer to stay in deeper waters when not actively hunting. They are solitary creatures, and when they are in proximity to each other, they will fight for food and territory, and reproduction isn't a very common thing. They reproduce through ovoviviparity and have the ability to reproduce through parthenogenesis. What makes them truly feared by land creatures is that they have the ability to mimic noises and voices, and do not tend to speak with their own voice. They don't have a developed language of their own that is understandable to others, and they also have a type of venom that tranquilizes prey. So getting into the claws of one of these creatures means it is highly unlikely to get out. Got some cool speculative biology on siren-like creatures, which I like a lot. We haven't seen much of XanderShroom's setting. I forget what it is called, but this is a cool addition. I like this a lot. We had a really neat image as well that was supplied. I think XanderShroom drew this themselves, and it is very impressive. For day 387, the prompt was, what is the longest prison sentence ever served to completion in your world? How did it affect the detained? And this comes from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. Kendamarania writes, the first woman of humanity in entry in City of Woe. A quaint, elderly human answered the call to her little cottage in the middle of nowhere, in limbo. Whatever it is, go away. I have no need for any vagrants, lost fallen angels, or Malifurnians. A posh and hoarse voice croaked back. And how about old friends, Madam Lilith? Her eyes widened. She passed through the house and opened the door. Before her, standing the fly king of Corpi himself, Beelzebub. "My goodness, Baal, how long has it been?" Lilith embraced him, reeling back almost immediately upon his smell of rotting corpse. "Time has not been kind to you, huh?" Beelzebub took off his top hat and bowed. "It's the decay. Stresses and demands of a king can take a toll on the mind. Honestly, you'd know it more than I with your millennia-long reign." "Please, it was Lucifer who did all the ruling. He insisted on it." She welcomed him inside, taking off his coat. "Would you like anything to eat?" "Tea would be fine, thank you." Beelzebub looked around her abode, the wallpaper stained and tearing apart, while royal paintings from an age long past were hung around. "So this is the place you've been hiding away from. You should know I had to trek up to Pandemonium itself just to track letters of where you possibly could have gone. I would have expected that you would have resided in asylums somewhere like Malifern, not here. Honestly, I prefer how things are here. Everything is quiet and subdued here. No need for violent beheadings or the hustle or bustle of the big city in Corpi. Most things to worry about are the shrapnel storms and the occasional sinner." She came over to the living room with a porcelain tea kettle, pouring it into a cup for him. He took a slight sip. "You don't say, and I don't suppose you'll be staying here for a while, too?" Lilith thought for a moment before responding. "I prefer to think of this as my retirement home, where I'll live out the rest of my eternal sentence here. I am Hell's first prisoner, after all, thinking it best to leave Eden and start a new life with him." She thinly smiled. "Please." Beelzebub placed his bony, rotting hand on her tattooed shoulder. "You and I both know that you're not at fault here." "I was an idiot back then, freshly sculpted out of clay. In order to obey Adam, I practically jumped at the opportunity to escape, and Lucifer offered me that. He said that we could rule hell and earth together as husband and wife, and I earnestly believed that. Now look at me. Some old hag shackled down here because of some monstrous man." She dryly chuckled, although with a certain weariness in her breath. "That's enough, Lilith," he sternly ordered her. "You've been here for more than 10,000 years. Any normal human would have easily fallen down and given up, and yet here you are. Lucifer doesn't have any hold on you anymore. And why is it that I hear news that he still roams this land alive?" Silence fell upon the room for what seemed like hours, though it only passed for a few seconds. Beelzebub finally spoke up. "I don't have much of a choice. You were already in exile when the opportunity presented itself, and Pandemonium, Sathanas, was beheaded by the will of the people, and we managed to find where Lucifer and his 2 children were hiding. If we killed him, it would have set the entire city back for another century. Political turmoil would have plagued us. I had to set an example for everyone that things were going to be different. Plus, we thought it would be a worse fate if he had a slow death, starving out in the woods or getting torn apart by wild demons." Lilith tapped the teacup with her long fingernails. "That's good, I think. He's a wild man at heart. He'll be at home surviving off scraps, though I still wish my stepkin didn't have to follow him. Delphine and Mavith, they know not where they're going, following his path. They're still children at heart, even if they're as old as you. Lucifer made sure to keep it that way, to keep them slaves of his conscience. They're pawns, as you and I once were. And we too, and all of Pandemonium and their descendants, are just prisoners of his wickedness." Lilith sighed. She pulled out a blood oak pipe and lit it with a match, smoking out a puff of smoke, and sunk into her cushioned chair. "Goodness, where in the 9 spheres of heaven did you find that?" Beelzebub gasped. "We have to hunt high and low for that tobacco, and you're just puffing them like it's nothing." Lilith passed along the pipe and grinned. "I have my ways. A hermit has to be self-sufficient after all, and here we were waxing about imprisonment. Say, you Corpesians wouldn't happen to have books for my nieces and nephews on Earth?" Beelzebub almost choked on his inhale of nicotine. Yes, indeed. Just the other day I was teaching my little girl how to read with some Lewis Carroll. Alice, I believe the book was. "Still adopting orphan swarm demons, are you? You and Leviathan would be better off running a nunnery than being king." Lilith laughed, patting her friend's back and lamenting stories further into the day. I feel like some of the places where City of Woe has the most impact is where you take these sort of interesting old mythologies that were built around like things like rabbinic tradition and other like almost like pop culture pieces of myth that are based on other things from Old Testament writings and other kinds of scripture from like Hebrew and New Testament stuff, and then meshing them into this sort of realistic, holistic idea and this sort of urban fantasy setting of these people just kind of trying to get by. And it paints this really like bittersweet picture, actually. And it makes, in a few places, hell feel like not that bad of a place, honestly. Like it's the worst place you could go, but at the same time, Lilith doesn't seem to be doing too bad. Nugget writes, terror, justice, prompt, severe, inflexible, an entry in petrichor. Edward had been trying to wash the blood from his hands for what must have been hours now. He wasn't always afraid of blood, but something about his husband's needs. Who was he to deny them? He just wished the blood would come off so he wouldn't need to constantly be reminded of it. The bell rang. The one for the front door, followed by a distant knock. They had gotten rid of the rest of the staff months ago. The less who knew about Rosa's condition, the better. Blood still stained Edward's hands, but hopefully whoever was at the door didn't notice. Edward made his way across the estate and to the front door. The revolution had been getting more violent by the day. Most nobility had already been arrested, executed, or were in hiding. Were they next? Edward looked through the window. Thaddeus. It was Thaddeus. Edward felt his chest lighten. Thaddeus was his friend. They were brothers. They'd had their disagreements, but nothing would change that. He opened the door. Thaddeus, what a pleasant surprise. He was not alone. Edward, you've seen better days. As have you. Thaddeus seemed worn, not as badly as Edward, but that wasn't a high bar to pass. He had the distinct look of an overworked man, clothes not fastened properly, creases in his face more apparent than normal, and his hair, it was graying. A lot. Does stress do that to a person? Thaddeus came inside along with the two other revolutionaries who accompanied him. Is Lockhart home? Thaddeus asked. I don't see why that matters. Edward could feel his throat tightening. Thaddeus continued walking through the estate, looking for Lockhart as Edward followed him. To what do I owe the pleasure of your company? Business. They came to the master bedroom, the smell of death already in the air. Thaddeus placed his hand on the handle. I think you should leave. Thaddeus did not listen and opened the door regardless. The room was quiet, too quiet. The air was stale. The flowers within the room were dried and wilted, and laying motionless in the bed were the frail and rigid remains of Ambrosius Lockhart. Thaddeus approached the body. He was no doctor, but he didn't need to be. Ambrose was stone cold. He had no pulse. His body was stiff with rigor mortis. He knew he was dead, but after everything he had been trying to find on the man, he was surprised to see how simple a death it seemed to be. Rose. Edward ran up to his bedside to look at the same scene Thaddeus was. Did you know? Edward couldn't bring himself to respond. He just looked down at the lifeless form of the man he couldn't bear to lose. He didn't even notice when Thaddeus walked away to converse with his company. As Edward held the cold body, he saw something. His brooch was gone. Edward, you're under arrest and sentenced to execution, Thaddeus said. What? For reason of treason, illegal necromancy, and murder. Edward's hands were forcibly placed behind his back and put in magic blocking cuffs as Thaddeus spoke. Under whose authority? Thaddeus took out a badge of identification signed off by Thalia Vane. Under authority of the Vane House. No, s'il te plaît? Don't I get some kind of trial? Books on necromancy and organs all over the entire estate. Dead husband, you being the only registered mage here? I doubt it. Thaddeus, please, we're brothers. You chose your side. He's still alive. Ma Rose, he's out there. He isn't dead. He isn't dead. He needs me. Thaddeus. Take him away. Edward was dragged away, still screaming about how Ambrose was still alive. The mad ramblings of a madman, and he was taken to the Bastille. It had been overtaken by the revolution a few years ago in a raid led by Thaddeus himself. He walked by various cells with other traitors of the revolution, some political enemies, plenty of Second Estate members, some members of the church, even normal citizens. He was thrown into a cell and left to his own thoughts as he awaited his execution in however many days. People don't realize how shattering that can be. How the worst punishment is to be alone with one's thoughts. Thaddeus, why? He began to scratch at his hands. All he wanted was to see the best in people, to dream of a brighter world. His nails dug deep into his skin. And Rose, he wasn't dead. He can't be dead. He knows his beloved too well. Buzzing flooded his eardrums. He's still out there. He's still out there. He began to draw blood from his arms and hands. Rose never wanted to die. He must be so scared. Periodically, people would be dragged by his cell to be beheaded by the guillotine. Maybe death would be a comfort, martyr or not. His eyes stopped following after a while. Would I ever reunite with my beloved on the other side? There's so much blood, it's everywhere, all over the walls and ceiling. It's seeping into his shoes. Is it even really there? Or maybe he really was mad. I used to see the way the world could be. Mold began to creep through the cracks of the walls and up his legs. How long had he even been here? But now, the way it is all I'm seeing. Thaddeus approached his cell. It hadn't been very long, all things considered, maybe a week since Lockhart died. But how things change. His hair had even more white running through it. The bags under his eyes seemed deeper. His broken leg is gone now. He instead has a prosthetic accompanied by a singular crutch for stability. In his free hand, he carried a small pile of something wrapped in familiar red fabric. Edward did not look up at him. He didn't seem to be looking at anything as he sat quietly in the corner, blood covering his hands and face from his scratching. He was pale and gaunt, his food laying cold and untouched by the door. He looked like a shell of who he once was. Edward? No response. I'm sorry. For everything. Edward didn't give any indication he even knew Thaddeus was there. You said Lockhart, Rose, was still alive, right? I believe you, all right? I believe you. He continued to stare blankly. Dried tears were stuck to his face. Look, Thaddeus tried to explain, Lockhart is still out there. That weird mold that was growing out of him, it's spreading across the entire city. It's killing people, Edward. You're the only one who might know what's going on and how to stop him. Please. Still, Edward did nothing. Thaddeus opened the door and came inside to approach him directly and place the bundle of items in his lap. It consisted of his violin, scarf, and the diamond brooch Ambrose had gotten for him. Here, I brought you some of your things. I'm sorry. You're free to leave, but I need your help, please. Edward didn't move, aside from touching the scarf, feeling the fibers of it and rubbing his fingertips on it to feel the friction. Something to hold, something that's real. He's really here, then. Why would he let me go? I'll leave you alone now. He always hated Rose. Thaddeus got up to leave. Edward finally stood up, draping the scarf over his neck as he clutched the violin. The strings dug painfully into his already blistering fingertips as he approached Thaddeus. Who am I to think he won't turn on me again once this is all over? Edward? Rose must be so scared. My husband needs me, Edward said wearily. His grip tightened on the violin. And you are not getting in my way. And before Thaddeus could react, the taste of iron filled his mouth as Edward slammed the violin directly into his jaw, shattering the bone beneath. He staggered and quickly lost balance before falling to the floor. Edward threw the edge of the scarf over his shoulder and reattached his brooch as he walked away. His husband was out there somewhere. He needed to find him. A really good piece. I'm continually kind of impressed with your ability, Nugget, to very seamlessly move us from one locale to another in your writing. I feel like this is a thing that can be kind of difficult, and it feels very natural when you do it. I feel like I know why I am in a certain area, and you're not unnecessary at all with sort of the prose in regards to that. And then I really like this very, very deep depiction of anguish. I'm assuming this is before the scene in which we see Edward climb the tower or get thrown off the tower. I'm trying to place this chronologically, and I'm sure you can help us out with that, if you so choose, of course. For day 388, the prompt was, how does your world deal with the fourth wall, if at all? And this comes from Colonel Flint in the Discord. Nugget writes, Nowhere Man, and has delineated the setting as 3 question marks. The Mindscape, a series of doors in a vintage style, each displaying a symbol associated with the setting behind it, a wilting rose, an hourglass filled with the void of space, a bolt of lightning through an eye, and many more. Some, created by the creator of the Mindscape, some borrowed for the sake of set dressing characters for others' settings. At the end of the hallway is a common room and a control center, though the characters are also capable of interacting within each other's worlds outside of canon when offset. Above it is an isolated bedroom, floating in the void of space, lacking a ceiling or fourth wall like a dollhouse. Within it is the closest thing this world has to a god. A life-sized porcelain doll with a large piece of paper taped over their face, a hermit of sorts. Even within their original universe, wherever it may be now, face and porcelain cracked from trauma and stress, they've begun to cover it with a piece of paper with various faces drawn across it, but they are most comfortable alone. Well, not exactly alone. All around the room, across the shelves, desk, and bed, are far smaller dolls made in the likeness of various characters used in his work. He himself doesn't talk often. He could if he wanted, but chooses not to, instead communicating through their characters, almost as if he'd rather people pay more attention to them than him. The doll sat on the floor in the middle of the room, staring absent-mindedly at the TV showing only static. He is holding the replica of a frail man dressed in green, with long black hair and a white streak running through it. Before long, the character himself walked through where a door would have been if it weren't for the innate dream logic of the mindscape, holding an old stuffed dog wearing a red sweater vest. "Good morning, Nugget," Victor said, handing him the stuffed dog. "Have we heard from Ox yet?" Nugget shook his head. "Probably for the best. We have yet to finish day 387. Victor paused for a moment as he said this. Day 387. Wow, we've been here for a while, haven't we? Nugget nodded before standing up and approaching the shelves. Victor's attention went to the bed, specifically a blanket featuring a piece of art done by Nugget himself. "You have that blanket on the bed. Why?" "You know why," Emrys smirked, manifesting in the room as Nugget picked up his doll as well. He wrapped it around his body pillow. "I think it's a great place to display it, not like there was any kind of fancy cover on it anyway." Victor sighed. Why did his mom even send him this? "Because it's funny, and she was right, and you agree. You know you agree." "Have we heard from Lockhart yet?" Victor said, trying to change the subject. "I'm sorry, who decided on 387 being a Petrichor entry?" Victor silently pointed at Nugget. "Still can't believe they think Petrichor's his main setting," Emrys grumbled. "Regardless, I think I agree that Edward's arrest is the more interesting option than talking about chaos. I can't think of anything new that would be added with them." "But my trial," "that we've barely written." "Fine, go talk to Lockhart, see if I care." Victor smiled softly before jumping off the ledge of Nugget's bedroom to the mindscape below, where he immediately approached the door, displaying a wilting rose. It was morning in the Lockhart estate as Edward made his way sleepily through the kitchen to prepare a cup of tea to start his day. As he did so, he was accompanied by a man who would stick out like a sore thumb compared to the rest of the setting, dressed in cargo pants, a compression shirt, a red cardigan, and a cowboy hat, speaking with a heavy southern accent. "And I know, no body, no death. Oldest trope in the book. Even you've written with it," the southern man was rambling about. "But they cut his arm off. He's no longer Doomfist. I dare say he's barely even Doom. He's the only Overwatch character who is just straight up out of commission right now. I mean, sure, there was Anna with her eye a while back, but that was in her backstory. Doomfist is just gone. Town's being run by Vendetta now. She's one of the new heroes. Newer as Overwatch 2. They took the 2 off in the update. It's just Overwatch now, but they added 5 new heroes on top of that." As he continued to infodump about the new Overwatch update, Edward made his way to a small table beside a window where he sat down to enjoy his cup of tea as rain poured down the glass. And within a few seconds, a door opened and Victor joined them. "Hello, bonjour," Edward said, still slightly groggy. "Bonjour, Victor started. "Hey, Jack, long time no see. What are you doing here?" "Well, I still don't have a door and the foyer gets lonely," Jack explained. "I'd normally pester Bo, but his door's been locked lately, so I was telling Edward about the new Overwatch update." "Yeah, we were told your campaign would start in December. Sorry." "I don't mind him being here when we're offset," Edward said. "You're always welcome here whenever you'd like." "Y'all have the most fleshed-out food out of the Mindscape worlds, and by the way, speaking of December, you know who was created in December and already has a door in the TTRPG area? Romulus." "Nugget has a better mental rendering of Rust and Blood than he does the Underdark," Victor explained. "This is bullshit. I've been here a year now," Jack thought for a moment. "Can Predwin adopt me? He actually talks about his settings. I have 2 bullet points in my wiki about getting isekai'd, but no idea where I get sent aside from it's dark." "Jack, mon ami, I say this with as much kindness as I can. You would not survive in Predwin's settings." "I hate it here," Jack said flatly. "Right, well, I'm gonna go see if Graham's door is unlocked so I can bully him a bit. Nice talking to y'all." And with that, Jack grabbed a loaf of black bread from the table and walked through a random door to return to Mindscape, leaving Edward and Victor alone. "I take it you're here to talk about Rose?" Edward asked. "Ideally, yes. That was what I was here for." "He's in his study." "Danke." Victor walked into Ambrose's study, where he saw Ambrose sitting by his desk in front of what seemed to be a typewriter. The place seemed far cleaner than it usually would be in character. While jars of various organs still lined the walls as per his story, they were contained as simple oddities on his shelves. He supposed it was easier to think this way. "Good evening, Lockhart." "It's 9 a.m., Ambrose said with his usual dead tone. "Good evening, Lockhart. Why are you here?" "Just wondering what you have been working on lately." "Plenty of things." Ambrose leaned back in his chair as he thought. "What's outside of Petrichor? Which isn't west, by the way. Edward made a reference to it during a mock-up, which, as funny as it'd be, egress is north, so it wouldn't make sense. The apocalypse, which caused the world to fracture, we have some decent ideas about it involving Granddaddy Lockhart and Edward's ancestor from the same time causing it. So how's Thalia coming along?" People are going to start thinking we can't write women." "People already think we can't write women," Ambrose admitted. "Yeah," Victor grimaced. "How about this? You give Thalia a female staff member and have them talk about the weather." "The weather, Cogwin? In Petrichor?" "Yeah, the weather. Look, we have to pass the Bechdel test somehow." "My issue is tying her in with the cast we already have. I can flesh her out fine, probably. The issue is she's disconnected from the rest of the plot. One of Nugget's friends suggested her being diabetic and that being her disability. I know we've disregarded it due to the stereotype about the second estate gorging on sugar, but I think I like it, actually. I looked into how it'd be handled in the 1700s, and it sounds like it would have been a death sentence. Insulin could be a fairly recent invention created for her, but until then, it would give her father a reason to reveal the affair because he didn't think she'd make it, leading to her extreme values of feeling replaceable and adding parallels to myself. If she survived her grim prognosis, she'd be both more sympathetic to me, but expect me to handle it her same way. But that still doesn't answer what she wants, what her fatal flaw is, and how it ties into everything else. I thought she wanted your position on the council. But is that problematic, because all of her plot lines would then revolve around men? I think at this point, however she's written, could be seen as problematic. Just go full, we support women's wrongs, and if people have issues with it, just point out that everyone sucks in Petrichor, and it's misogynist to hold that against Thalia specifically. Maybe. In either case, I take it you don't yet have the transcript for day 387? I have concepts of a transcript. It's still up to Nugget to actually write it down. Want me to bring it back to Nugget, or do you want to? I can later. Give him a bit of time to wake up before writing. All right, I shall continue my rounds. I left Nugget with Emrys. You left Nugget with Emrys alone? Victor pursed his lips. I should go check on them. Probably. All right, well, gotta go. Bye. Victor opened the door to Ambrose's study, which now led back to the main exterior hallway of the mindscape, and returned to the floating bedroom of Nugget to find Nugget still sitting on the floor drawing as Emrys talked. And that is why I single-handedly started the Italian Renaissance. Victor blinked as he tried to process what he walked in on Emrys saying. What? Hello, Victor, help me explain this. I am the settings equivalent of Jesus, right? And the most accepted depiction of Jesus is such because of a painting Leonardo da Vinci did of his boyfriend. Therefore, you were not dating Leonardo da Vinci. Are you jealous, Vic? It's not like you were there. You know who else wasn't there? You were not in Florence in the 1400s. Aw, you're no fun. Why are you like this? It makes things more interesting, right, Nugget? Emrys turned to Nugget, who looked between the two characters before shrugging. Victor opened his mouth to say something more, but was cut off by the distinct sound of a Discord ping, immediately followed by a purple gem flying in through the window at top speed and hitting Victor directly in the head with the sound of a metal pipe. Ow! Victor fell to the floor as the Atovia bot slowly followed. Emrys was on the verge of tears from laughing at this. Dude, Victor explained, what happened to just getting the Discord ping from Ox? I don't know, but that was hilarious. Good bot. I am beginning to agree with Alex. The Atovia bot gave a sad chirp. All right, Victor said, lightly petting the bot as an apology. You're a good bot. Do you have today's prompt? The Atovia bot jumped up, chirping happily as it went over to Nugget's laptop, bouncing briefly on top of it to pull up the daily prompts page before flying away. From Syroxian, at World Builders. Build together day 388. How does your world deal with the fourth wall, if at all? From Colonel Flint. Emrys smiled. Oh, now that's a very interesting prompt. I'll start brainstorming. Wow, okay, this is a lot of fun. I feel like I didn't expect anything quite this entertaining and quite this insular. Truly, if you're just listening to the podcast, there are going to be things that you're going to miss. And if you think these things sound funny, then you should come to the Discord and join us. There is a lot of references to different members of our community, members that we know and love well, and Nugget is clearly like incorporated that into this mindscape idea. I really like this idea of it being a set. I mean, I've talked about how with Atovia sort of, I suppose to pull a classic one, insists upon itself when it comes to realism. I don't have Atovia interact with the fourth wall at all, but I really like this depiction of it where Nugget is digging really, really hard into the idea of these characters as depictions of psyche, and I find it really fun. I think the mindscape idea is really powerful. Nugget's sort of self-expression here of, a damaged person working through things via these fictional characters and their interactions with each other. We got some fun hints at, I'm not sure what else, with the Jack character and other stuff. I thought it was kind of fun. Characters for other games and for campaigns and TTRPGs was, all in all, a very fun read, and I really enjoyed that, Nugget, so thank you a lot for bringing this one to us. Kendamarania writes, differences in tone, an entry in both City of Woe and Return to Feylund. This story is considered non-canonical to both worlds. Hell, Corpi, 1943. Amaziel was leaning on a chair in the office, utterly engrossed in a book to the point she could barely even put it down and continue with her case file. Kalisha, their center secretary, peered over from her desk, smoking a cigarette. Hey, aren't you supposed to be working? The hell is even keeping cooped up anyways? She looked to try and see the title. Sorry, it's just books like these are just right to escape into. It's called Return to Feylund. It's a fantasy romance book. Ermeziel barely made eye contact with her. Rascalat, is there such a thing as that? The last fantasy I read was Back on Earth, a book about a little man named Bilbo going on an adventure for gold while with the company of 13 dwarves. It was British, I believe, by some guy named Token? Galicia tried to recall while leaning on her desk. I could never get into anything romantic related, though. It's just too happy and cheerful for my tastes. Good point, I suppose. I just wish I was like the main character Lysel, going on fantastic adventures while being guided by all manner of fairies, like unicorns, elves, and mermaids. Far better than here, Ermeziel sighed. Eroth peeped in from the kitchen with a mug of black coffee. Are you reading a damn children's book, Ermeziel? That pretty much sounds like a fairy tale, and stuff like that won't help in places like here. So unrealistic with their magic and princesses and all of that. All escapist childishness. I think the childishness is the whole point of it, Ermeziel pointed out. The two main characters, Lysel and Galaric, were childhood crushes to each other when they were on their first adventure 20 years ago. Now, having grown to full adults while separated by realms, they can hopefully get together even if they are being pulled in different directions. It's very nostalgic, I would say. At least that's what I would think it would be like if a human were to read it. And yet nostalgia can be a fog that blinds the stupidest people. It isn't reality, and only an idiot would ignore reality. Not to mention the poor quality of romance novels as a whole. But if it's what you like, I can't intrude. He shrugged, sipping his mug as the sirens of the city wailed from the street, responding to yet another murder that occurred in hell. Feylund, Elfin Valley, 2026. Galaric and Lysel were lying beside each other under the shade of the forest, letting the cool breeze brush against their cheeks as they rested. Sunlight scattered under the leaves, their skins seemingly kissed and awash by the rays like golden paint. Grass blanketed the two as they rested together, lullabied by the creaking sounds of the woods. The elf prince turned towards Lysel. Don't you have any stories from Earth to pass the time? We only have so many songs and fables to be shared here, Galaric asked her in a low, soft hush. There was this one comic I remember reading as a teen, though I scarcely think you'd be interested in it, Lysel reminisced before shaking her head. Galaric chuckled. Please, it can't be that terrible, right? I suppose so. Lysel smiled, fiddling with her curly locks when trying to remember its details. It was called City of Woe, I think. It was a detective story about these three people. Eroth, Ermeziel, and Kalisha investigating crimes and corruption in a city in hell. Hell, isn't that a country on Earth? He asked while scratching his stubble, watching the leaves rustle in the wind as he tried to recall the existence of a hell from his studies of the human domain. Lysel laughed and laid on her side to face him. No, it's like the afterlife that some people believe in, where evil men and women go where they die, tortured by demons and fallen angels for eternity. It was quite grim, from what I read, criminals and gangsters killing each other while blood and guts gushed crimson red from each panel. It almost felt like a horror at some points. I couldn't bear to read much longer, honestly. Why would anyone ever write such a thing? Fiction is meant to entertain, and I don't think anybody would even enjoy reading something so cruel and bleak. He shook his head. It was meant to reflect reality, I think, on how to respond to cruel and turbulent times such as what those detectives were going after, when injustice was common and things made little sense. I just found it very heavy-handed. The author was trying too hard to make statements that we already knew. Goodness, those are the worst kinds of stories, Gelerick lightened up, grinning. You're right, probably something I wouldn't like. Got a little bit of a self-critique from Kendamarania here, which is a fun way to utilize this prompt, I think. I really like that, in a certain way, the fourth wall you've constructed is an internal fourth wall, a fourth wall which in this non-canon event is broken by one piece of fiction in one of the other pieces of fiction, but not actually from the pieces of fiction to our world, which is a really interesting twist on this, and a fun way to have each of these very different settings retrospect on the other a little bit. The Wanderer writes, Windows go two ways, you know. An entry in the Eternal City, Endrin.
Yes, welcome to the Eternal City. Yes, I know you don't know a single thing about it yet, nor will it particularly matter for you to stay here.
Bilderheist blinked. There was no one else in the hallway besides him and the architect. He peered around to check, only finding an empty office. From the text of the plaque, it was the architect's office. No one was in it. Only a single letter adorned the desk. Architect, I've been here before, quite a lot. Heck, you've killed me at least 1,000 times in this hallway alone. I've spent who knows how many years here, so what incarnation are you talking about?
Well, I wasn't talking to you. I was responding to a question posed.
He picked up the letter. It held a strange symbol on it, more like an emblem. It held a simple phrase. How does your world deal with the fourth wall, if at all? What is a fourth wall?
It's when someone addresses the fact that they're being read like a story. For example, right now, numerous people are reading. Well, most are actually listening to what's going on right now.
So people are reading about us, Bilderheist frowned. He found it to be an uncomfortable thought. He scanned the architect's face, but of course, as always, never could get a read on it.
Yes, a decent amount of them too, though it's hard to say how many will specifically see this. But yes, they think you're a story, and just a story, written by a boy calling himself the Wanderer who has delusions of grandeur, thinking he made the entirety of Endrin, the before, and even the Eternal City.
He thinks he made all of that? How? Not even a single Astari made all of that.
Yes, he thinks he's been writing it as a piece of fiction.
He's got to have a big ego if he thinks he did all of that. He didn't, right?
Big ego, certainly. As for whether he did or not, he didn't. He just thinks he did. He isn't alone either. Quite a few people in his world think that they made different worlds across 1 trillion realities. But really, they go about assuming it's all stories and nothing else, and never stop to think about what are their stories to somebody else. For example, Earth, a small planet tucked away inside the same reality Endrin is in, it orbits a star they call Sol in a galaxy called the Milky Way. To the people in Indurnus, they're quite a popular story. Having read a few of the stories being developed there, I found myself quite fond of the stories about the Cold War, two superpowers in a staring contest.
The architect pointed at one of the hallway's countless stained glass windows. This one had a world, partially blue, with stars stained into the window. It was beautiful.
That's the one that leads to their world. It's quite a fascinating one, very lively. They have a few cities and architectural styles that I even liked. Perhaps one day they'll see my city and that will inspire them to do something other than read about us through a man-child's daydream.
Why would they want to be reading about us, though, or listening to a story about me and you? I mean, I've been woefully unsuccessful in killing you. I mean, I can kind of see why they'd want to read about you, but truthfully, you're just an evil god. Bilderheist began choking. The oxygen had been turned into sulfur, one of the more common ways the architect used to execute Bilderheist when annoyed. Bilderheist gave a rude gesture before passing away. As the architect returned the air to normal, a gold pulse broke out through Bilderheist's body, bringing him back. He coughed and got off the floor. He drew his revolver and shot the architect a few times, not that any of the shots mattered.
Why, yes, of course. Truth be told, you're more popular among them than I am. They relate more to a stubborn, frail mortal who strives to do the impossible than an apathetic god who long since became a function rather than a builder. And sure, you've been unsuccessful and won't be, but they admire that. You should really see the kinds of things they read about or watch. Be glad you don't have to deal with what they call brain rot.
Their brains are rotting, Bilderheist exclaimed.
Their brains are not in a state of decomposition.
The architect thought, but it certainly isn't helping.
None of that, narrator. My thoughts are not to be known.
Bildergeist looked around again, checking for the invisible narrator in the supposed audience. True to the architect's words, there was none to be found. The architect found his reaction among...
That was your only warning. You are expendable.
Narrator? Are we being narrated for them? Bilderheist asked.
Yes. Do not worry. I created a new narrator for this, one that will be more tolerable in its existence. This one doesn't care or presume it knows my feelings.
Who even is narrating for them? You're not making any sense. Furthermore, if they're just writing down stories they've seen, wouldn't they know that? Architect, I reckon you might not be telling it straight, Bilderheis complained.
The narrators, yes. There are a lot of things. Some narrators are the people who think they made worlds trying to describe it. Others are people who witnessed it. Quite usually, a narrator is what a herald or a star is projecting out into the schism between realities. In this instance, I was using a construct of mine to project, but it failed, so I replaced it. As to writers knowing about it, that's an entirely different question. So you don't always get everything right the first time, and a person's mind is quite powerful indeed, so it usually fills in blanks. Sometimes it gets glimmers of truth and fills the rest in incorrectly, and slowly corrects it more and more accurately until they get to a mostly accurate representation. And that is, of course, assuming that the world they're relaying existed before they did. You fragile sapiens are quite a bit more powerful than you give yourselves credit for. The majority of them form worlds, design and build them first, and the world comes into fruition afterwards. That's how the heralds build worlds. And as fragile of ignoramuses as your kind is, you are still embryonic gods. Unfortunately, those words and thoughts do have power, and they affect realities in a very real way.
Wait, they're actually making worlds. I thought only Astarian heralds could. Well, at least from nothingness, Bilderheis asked.
Well, yes, they do. Some of them make multiple. The difference between you and I is that I can travel to mine. I can benefit from them and see them to completion. Also, usually it's something else that actually makes the world. Usually one of the eternal ones does so, but others, like that wanderer, are just idiots copying things with no originality, if so to speak.
How many worlds are built like that? Are all worlds made like that?
Trillions of worlds, and those create more and more. That's in a large part why I continue to exist, to keep making them, in part for those making worlds rather than discovering.
They must get so repetitive after a while. Why bother making them real at all?
Sapiens are repetitive. Why make more of them? As valueless as I personally find you little things, the worlds made have value. There's one that's an endless repeating room, but wrong. Megastructures spanning the orbit of planets. A world where it never ceases to rain. There's worlds of death with realms that nearly kill everything. Worlds where corpses make up the structure of the world, and some of their bigger stories, they hold multitudes of worlds in them.
Oh, what was that unholy screeching like nails against stone? Bilderheis complained.
Something they likely won't see. I veiled it. Sure, they could view it, but it will take effort for little reward.
Can I visit any of them? Can they visit us? Bilderheis asked.
You know I won't bring you to any unless I mean to kill you there. Perhaps one of the deaths there will stick. As for them, they don't believe us real.
How? We're speaking about them right now, Bilderheis said, trying to stall as he reloaded the rifle.
Because to them we are just words written and being read. I could prove that I'm real by saying things that the Wanderer wouldn't know. I could list their IP addresses, their actual address, a loved one's final words, but they consider that doxing, and that is rude. Call me evil all you like, one thing that I am not is rude. Besides, we Astari do not interfere with each other's words without request. I'll admit I'm curious as well. Their world, despite not having what we call magic, is a very magical one indeed.
How? Bilderheis fired 6 more rounds at the architect. The bullets paused in the air a few inches away and fell to the ground. Another failure. He debated about whether it would be the time to use it, but decided not.
A burning primordial fire powers their entire world's life from 93 million miles away. Its eldritch power so strong that looking at it without protection will make you blind. Their life takes the light and builds more life with it. Then creatures consume that and grow themselves. But of course, to them it is not magic. Because after all, knowing how something works means that of course it's not magical. No world considers itself to be a magical land after all. To them, their world is just science. A fancy word they made that means they've figured out how the magic operates.
Whoa, that sounds amazing. Their world is really powered by ancient fire. For once, Bilderheis forgot having been murdered within the last 5 minutes.
I forget your ignorance, yes. Your home was also powered by one as well.
The architect sat down at his desk, pulled out a file that only he could read.
Perhaps I will send you to one, an endless labyrinth of discombobulated rooms. Sounds like a fun way to get you out of my way for a while. Enjoy that.
Bilderheis started to protest but was stopped. Then he was floating in the air. No, falling. After a few moments he stopped and fell into one of the windows, a yellow, stained glass one. Instead of shattering like most would expect, he fell through it as if it were a small puddle. He landed on yellow carpet. moist carpet. The walls were yellow in a pattern as well, with square lights that let off a loud, omnipresent buzz. He cursed, reloaded his gun, and set out to find an exit. Fun nod to the back rooms at the end here, but I really like... I've seen takes kind of like this before. I feel like there's probably a term someone's coined, but they're almost like super fiction or something, in which it attempts to break the fourth wall and convince itself and convince the reader that there really wasn't one in the first place. It's a really fun idea. I like it a lot. And again, we're seeing the Wanderer sort of uses as a bit of a self-critique, which I like. The idea of talking about your own ego through stuff like this, I think, is one of the really great uses of fourth wall discussion. For day 389, the prompt was, how do businesses stay in power in your world? And this comes from ScrubsyBoy844. NYUX writes, how do businesses stay in power in your world? I don't need to write more than one sentence. It's so simple. There are no corporations or businesses. It's just the government. Always has been. Actually, there's a bunch of underground bars and stores that trade smuggling wares, but it's funnier if I just say that. I think one of our simplest to date. I do think we had a one sentence a while back, which is always kind of funny. But there you go. How do businesses stay in power? Just being the government, I guess, is what NYUX is telling us. And sure, that is a reliable way, I think, to stay in power sometimes. For day 390, the prompt was, what is a combat niche that a group of yours has used to become powerful? And this comes from the Wanderer in the Discord. The Wanderer writes, ship troopers in Entry and Forest Kingdom. It's no secret that the Starkling Empire has a disadvantage in special combat. A firm law in their codex disallows anyone besides humans from being in the military, including machines, robots, and completely automated weaponry. Comparing that to, say, the Fighting Kingdom, that can produce nearly 1,000 automated strike craft a day and make another 1,000 automated weapons a day, while the Fighting Kingdom has the most powerful military, their philosophy is not isolated to themselves. Nearly every advanced civilization that can use a similar tactic. You very quickly get what, by all rights, should be completely one-sided engagements between the two. However, the Starkling Empire is not one to let that prevent their victory, so they created ship troopers. While force fields repel all objects, they can be overwritten with an anti-field generator. Usually this would be useless in combat since it requires slower movements, however. To get outfitted troops onto the hull of another ship? There it works beautifully. Once past the field, the troops magnetize themselves to the metal and turn a space assault into their specialty, ground assault. They can even disable their anti-shield generators to give themselves cover. There, they can disable weapons, drill into the ship and attack the interior, or enter the control deck and wipe out the ships without a single cannon. And if they drop the shields, well, then the ship is a sitting duck waiting to get taken out of the picture. While other nations have picked up on this fighting style and have made protections against it, they have to be building those specifically against the Starkling Empire, which usually only works half the time. Many commanders consider battle to be like a game of chess, and well, the Starkling Empire has mastered pulling out checkerboards on them. Kind of some cool politics surrounding war and how one group has stuck to their codex of morals and right and wrongs and still remained a force to be reckoned with. It gives me like Dune vibes a little bit. I can see a slow shot of some people in suits sort of like sending themselves towards a ship, landing on it, and then, doing some kind of thing to it. It's very space opera. I like it. At the time of recording this, there was no entries for 391, but the prompt was, what is a common structural securement method for machines, vehicles, or appliances? And this came from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord, but no one really ended up coming up with anything that they wanted in Worldhammer, so we will skip it for now. For day 392, the prompt was, what does music sound like in your world? And this comes from XanderShroom in the Discord. Nugget writes, show-stopping number, an entry in Petrichor. Is it finally time to share this? Petrichor is intended to be consumed as a musical. Unfortunately, I don't write music, so that's just a fun fact until I find someone who can. Generally, music in Petrichor, both in and out of lore, is dramatic, melancholy, and done in a major key, a lot of dark academia aesthetics, and a lot of strings. Each of the characters also has a specific way their music sounds. Thalia is associated with the harp. Her music is very clean and classical. It's high and soft and steady, much like how she wants to be perceived. It's the type of music one would hear at a ball or in even an elevator. She is the type of music one would imagine sirens using to lure sailors to their deaths with their mesmerizing song. Songs that have a similar aesthetic to her include Stola Sings from Has-Been Hotel, Phantom of the Opera from Phantom of the Opera, Once Upon a December from Anastasia, City of the Dead from Uriel, The Cost of the Crown from Mercedes Lackey, and Hey Little Songbird from Hadestown. Thaddeus is associated with the bass. He rarely sings about himself. He almost sees himself as the mouthpiece of the Third Estate. His music has a much more folk sound than the others do, and he ranges from personal laments to revolutionary rallies. But he always sings about the needs of others before his own, and his music reflects that bar community sharing a drink and song feel. Songs that demonstrate how he sounds include Piano Man by Billy Joel, A Final Toast for Oliver Cromwell by Ye Banished Privateers, A Bar Song, Tipsy, by Shabuzi, Wait for It, from Hamilton, Do You Hear the People Sing, from Les Mis, God Help the Outcast, from Hunchback of Notre Dame. Ambrose is represented with the piano. His music is low and dramatic, with a lot of carry in a low and smooth singing voice, capable of holding a note for a while. I think the best way I can describe his music motifs is that it's what you'd imagine singing in a giant Gothic manor at 2 a.m. when the place is empty. As a lot of the time, that's what he's doing. His music is frantic, yet controlled and practiced with musical swells to support his voice. For someone whose lungs are actively turning into sludge over the course of the story, he's got some pipes. Songs that sound like something he'd sing are For the Departed, by Schaefer James, Evermore, from Beauty and the Beast, Why We Build the Wall, from Hadestown, The Light That Comes Through, by Sparkbird, No One Must Ever Know, from Jekyll and Hyde, From Now On, from The Greatest Showman. And Edward, oh Edward. He's the crux of the whole musical as the main protagonist. His magic is actively tied to music, and his singing and playing are both unnaturally beautiful accordingly. It is something he's very passionate about, and a large part of the story is him making revisions to the song he wrote for Ambrose on their wedding, hoping to bring him back. He's directly inspired by Orpheus from Hadestown with how he interacts with the world. Edward's main instrument is the violin, but he can play basically anything if given time to feel out the instrument. Similarly, he doesn't have as distinct of a music motif as he's comfortable with most genres of music. The man has range. It makes it easier for him to meld with others, stand alone, however, he does still have some unique voice. With magic, he's capable of overlapping his voice over top of itself, which is something he is well known to do. He is also usually fairly soft, emotional, and classical with his own music. The passion that bleeds into every fiber of his character must be seen in his music after all. Songs that reflect how Edward sounds include Wait for Me, from Hadestown, Everywhere, Everything, by Noah Kahan, Mon Amour, Mon Ami, by Marie Lafayette, On via ta mère, from Expedition 33, Our Lady of the Underground, from Hadestown, The Greatest Show, from The Greatest Showman. Another fun fact about Edward, he's the only major character I have who doesn't have a main theme. Victor has Hourglass, Emrys has My Ordinary Life, Ambrose has For the Departed, even Thaddeus, a side character, has Black Mirror. Edward does not have a main theme in his playlist because he's so indecisive about music. In his mind, there's too many good songs to pick, just one to describe him entirely. This is a cool look at a little bit of like meta discussion on this setting that Nugget cares a lot about. I feel like I actually like the fourth wall submission even more after reading this because the idea of the set and it being a play, but also being real, and those two things being in conflict with each other is made even more sort of cemented by this entry, and I think that is a very compelling idea. Kendamarania writes, Old Train Song, an entry in Return to Faelund. Mrs. Toad sat at the edge of the boxcar, carefully placing her water bucket full of her 100 tadpoles on the straw. Watching the sun rest and disappear into the mountains meant that it was time to rest, and she felt terribly weary and tired after hopping around for nearly 3 days, all while carrying a bucket around her neck without sleep. She was nearly about to collapse and fall fast asleep, drifting off in the distant dreams of their old pond back home in the lily marshes, until a bump in the rails suddenly awoke her tadpoles and caused them to shriek into a terrible wail. What is it now? She drowsily muttered as she limped towards the bucket, her children all whining in a shrill, tiny voice. She laid beside the bucket and rocked it. Shh, shh. It's okay. It's okay. We are safe here. One of the several dozen boxes in the car tipped over and fell as the train jittered, including different instruments that the passengers were hauling over. One of these rolled over to her, a small, crudely made ocarina, likely used by one of the birds. Mrs. Toad then picked it up and inspected it. She was reminded of the Lily Marsh's own woodwinds, how her husband used to play them for her previous frog spawn. Perhaps, she thought, it would be the same for this generation as well. She began to blow and play, at first fumbling a bit, due to being a dozen toad years out of practice. With each ribbon and croak, she played familiar folk tunes that she grew up with back home. The sounds of the ocarina were easily drowned out by the tadpoles' continued crying and the echoed shrill of the train passing through the tunnel. Mrs. Toad began to pay little minds to the horrid calls around her as she became lost in the mere playing of the music. Even if it didn't bring peace to the tadpoles in the bucket, she felt herself become calm and still, for the ocarina's whistle blows brought her back to the panpipes and flutes that once played in the lily marshes, and how Mr. Toad once serenaded her to sleep with his own music. In the distance, she could also hear other sounds from the dark depths of the tunnel, a chorus of raindrops and running river water joining into the ocarina song. All of these were sounds familiar to Mrs. Toad back home, even if it was 500 miles away from where she was riding away from. She already knew what this was, magic. Began to sing in lyrics and rhythms from nature itself, playing along with her and humming rustling leaves and wind to the whining tadpoles. Mrs. Toad could also hear, with the magic song, the ribbits of distant toads producing a deep choral harmony with her ocarina without any intelligible words. Those were her ancestors, she thought, the ones who were not yet gifted with speech like she and Mr. Toad had. When she closed her eyes, she could have sworn that she could see them as vague shapes, looking down upon her and her children and smiling. Mrs. Toad began to feel more and more sluggish as she continued playing, halting the music to let out a deep yawn. When she looked beside her, she could see that her tadpoles had finally fallen asleep with the help of the magic lullaby. She stopped playing and laid next to her children in the straw, at last being able to rest. She smiled as the hums of nature began to fade out. "Good night, fair magic, thank you," she wished it, then turned to her side, to the bucket. "And good night, Hopper, Spring, Marshy, Frobo, Planter," and she continued on, wishing each of her 100 children good night, until she herself drifted asleep. This is fun, very cute. I got this kind of the pleasant feeling that you get from Willow and the Wisps a little bit, of these anthropomorphic / just sentient, sapient animal creatures kind of doing human things, but still with all the trappings of their strange or unique biology. For day 393, the prompt was, what is a trump card used either diplomatically or militarily used by a faction? And this comes from The Wanderer in the Discord. The Wanderer writes, the anvil and hammer, an entry in Karn. Iron Light was certainly one of the strongest superheroes. She could fly at Mach 4, had taken a railgun shot and been able to keep fighting, and could easily throw a tank, but she wasn't on the same level as the most powerful supervillain. Normally, Blue Cape would fight his brother when his location was found, but he was still out of commission. Supernova was still off-world as well. Iron Light was Karn's strongest defender, and that didn't bode well for her. She felt like a child trying to take down a soldier. He was stronger, faster, and had more combat experience. The one thing she could hold on to was the fact that he was just as durable as she was. Allegedly. No one knew if that was true, and it didn't feel like it was. Really, Iron Light, they sent you? Red Cape said. He was currently trying to chase her down again. He was faster, but aerial dodging was easier than catching. Aren't you too busy looking pretty for your country's fundraising galas to be out here fighting me? Iron Light smirked. She had actually had to quit back for that one. So you think I'm pretty? She shot back. Red Cape paused mid-flight, while he quickly denied it, saying how women were gross, sounding very much like a little boy complaining about cooties. Furthermore, the pause gave Iron Light a surprising answer. She wasn't sure what to do with that information, but she had it. Her earpiece buzzed with a message from Hero Communications. Keep him in one spot for us. We're sending down the anvil. A message much easier said than done, or at least it was before Red Cape caught her foot. He threw her to the ground, a small crater forming beneath her. Red Cape landed on her, his foot driving her stomach further into the ground. It hurt. They had been fighting for nearly half an hour, and he barely had any wounds to show for it, but she did see a solution. Red Cape always refused to adjust his attire to the modern era, while Blue Cape very often ended up in the same state in heavier battles due to only the cape and kilt being indestructible. Red Cape only wore those to begin with, and that meant she had a certain area to kick. And she did. She did so twice, which temporarily incapacitated him in pain long enough for her to slip out and to get the signal, anvil is dropped, get away from him. A few seconds later, a mass of metal hit him, a hexagon with triangle attachments on either side. It hit with enough force that if she hadn't known Red Cape was under it, she wouldn't have known anything was. She got another signal. Priming the net, keep him on the anvil for 10 seconds. Another very difficult request. Red Cape burst out of the ground outside of the anvil, looking a tad worse for wear, but not by much. He dashed at her in the air. She began flying up in a spiral pattern. He was catching up. A countdown began in her ear. With 3 seconds left, she dashed downwards towards the anvil. He was even faster on the descent. Red Cape followed. With a quarter of a second left, she dived into the ground just outside of the anvil. With not enough time to follow suit, he hit the anvil. While she hit hands and head first, he landed on his feet. However, before he had the chance to do anything, a large object hit him. It sprung out across the anvil as a thick steel net. He began melting it with flames standing and ripping the net to pieces. As the net began to fail, the comms spoke again. Hammer 1 deployed. Hammer 2 is loading. As Ironlight picked herself up to look at the anvil, all of the triangles in it sprung up. Something long and cylindrical had hit it, shattering into dozens of pieces. As she looked closer at it, she realized it was a tungsten rod. Red Cape was lying on the anvil, a very damaged stomach present. He was wheezing, trying to catch his breath. The net was entirely ruined. As he stood up to get off, another one hit him in the back. Ironlight could now clearly see what the triangles were for. They were to catch shrapnel, preventing any damage to the area beside the massive force the hammer hit the ground with. As she got confirmation of a third and final hammer drop, Red Cape had again gotten up and began moving off the anvil. Not flying, not even walking, stumbling. She pushed him back onto the anvil. He fell, and the final one nailed him in the head. It too shattered, like the other ones. Red Cape was nearly unconscious, still alive. No one was sure if it was possible for him or his brother to die, but he was barely moving. She kicked him several football fields in distance. He hadn't used flight to prevent himself from being thrown the full amount. As trained, she put in quite a few security hits to make sure he stayed down. Before her adrenaline finally slowed down and she noticed her own wounds again, her uniform was tattered in most places. She could feel every place she had been punched, and her stomach was killing her. She gave Red Cape another kick, sending him back over to the anvil, and then felt herself collapsing in exhaustion. Nice, we got a tungsten rod kinetic weapon that you're using against superheroes, which is kind of fun. I've always found this take on superheroes really interesting and kind of a compelling aspect of realism, I think, to sort of have, hey, we'll throw another hero at this person to keep them distracted, but in reality, our main goal is to use like technology built to destroy these people as the primary weapon. We just need somebody to hold the bully down. Robin the Great writes, Ogres, an entry in What Lies West.
Titans, a lot of them. Sea-sickened, pale-skinned behemoths that would have won a war all on their own, but they weren't alone. And yet, despite their plate mail thick as castle's wall and dozens of orcs running around their feet, they lost. The ogres, the orcs, the catfolk, they all lost.
Rack the Mouse, Scholar. The ogres are a dying people. They once claimed the frigid south as their home and its mountains their kingdom. They stayed clear of human kingdoms, of dwarven holds, and elven citadels. Their cities were made from mammoth hides and bone scaffolding. Their weapons were spears and slings, yet, despite their primitive ways, the goblins of Ramradka and the human clergies of the Church of Orpheus were never in any danger, never in any immediate threat from the ogres. The ogres and some of the southern Vikings lived in unity with one another, all until House Thanius nobles found out about the massive giants within the south, that is. Greed, disgusting, hideous greed. Avarice, tempting and corrupting, desire, horrible and evil, the nobles with armies of soldiers at their back began hunting ogres for sport. Bars were filled with their tusks, libraries their severed heads, back alley apothecaries hung up their jewels. At first, the ogres fled further south, urging their southling kin to flee with them, but the cold was too harsh, the winds too sharp. They could not follow. The nobles, though, with money at their back, forged mighty rolling furnaces and dressed themselves in thick fur coats. The ogres were pushed further and further south until they, too, could not bear the frost of the polar gate. The ice froze even metal into brittle glass. The fleeting ice sprites sunk into bones and froze organs. Nothing, no matter how bulky, no matter how densely furred, could survive here, but that meant that the humans could not follow either. The ogres found deep caves, kilns of insulation that could keep them heated in the arcane cold, and they disappeared. Decades later, the Orc Revolution was near its start. The orcs, some of which bore banners for the hunting nobles as slaves, knew that the ogres had fled south, and that for the orcs to have any real chance of victory, the ogres would need to be recruited. A small group fled their encampment and found asylum in the lands of the church. From there, they organized with odd jobs and gathering provisions until finally they were ready to endure the frigid south's bite. It was a long journey. Many died, but the handful that pressed onward through the flesh-rending ice shards and soul-freezing cold found what they were looking for, the tracks of an ogre. The revolutionaries pressed onward. One succumbed to frostbite, another starvation, a third to an icicle to the jugular. Finally, only two found it, the massive wooden wall blocking our gargantuan cave mouth hiding from the north-blowing winds. The two greenskins banged upon the wall for what seemed like hours, screaming to be let in. It felt like ages before a massive, pale hand reached through a crack and pulled the door open. The ogres listened to their plight. They stood round a massive bonfire, silently staring at the orc duo as they spoke of the oncoming revolution, the mobilization of thousands of slaves desperate for vengeance and freedom. The ogre leaders looked among each other for a moment before nodding in near unison. The orcs, as the rulers of industry for the last several hundred years, were familiar with forging armor-own weapons and resizing them for larger or smaller soldiers. They had a plan, to make the ogres immune to their one weakness, to make the ogres invincible to everything that could ever be flung at them. 4 inches of solid iron, steel, bronze, whatever could be found, but 4 entire inches of metal armor nonetheless. Spears broke in half, claymores chipped into pieces, trebuchet volleys shattered on impact, the force of the blow absorbed by the dense, blubbery fat of the ogres' stomachs. Sure, some weapons could still harm them. Ballista, heavier trebuchets and catapults, oil pits, but all these tactics rely on a stationary foe, or at least a sluggish one. Ogres, though, are anything but slow. Even in full plate, each stride they took was 10 of a man's. Each running gait they made covered houses in distance with each quaking step. Though not as big as the mighty Bathka, 14 to 16 feet tall is still massive. The morale of humans and elves broke quickly as invincible titans charged their castles and ripped up their palisades by the roots. Spike traps were kicked into dust. Orcs in wicker cages were thrown over walls. Catfolk assassins lobbed by a hulking muscle into the fourth-story windows of nobles' houses. The ogres were absolutely the reason for the Armageddonist march of the orcs and their supporters. So then, how, despite all this, did the ogres, and by proxy the orcs, lose? The Minotaurs. They came from their northern prison with promises of citizenship and coin, and wrought death unto the green, pale, and fur-skinned masses of the revolution. Even human defectors and dwarven kinsmen who supported the revolution lost their heads and families. The Minotaurs had brought flintlock weapons, mighty projectile firearms that pierced through the ogre's armor as if made from soggy bread. The war was over in a month. Though they earned their safety and their right to live within the bounds of ex-Corosian territories, what was once 1,000 ogres is less than 100. Sad, weeping folk who have lost everything, and despite their best efforts, their population only sinks. Less and less giants roam the world each year, and eventually the only ones left will be the ones to die alone, to die as an alien monster that children told stories of to scare each other. For you see, the ogre kind lives forever. They do not die of old age, only illness or injury. They are very, very ill nowadays. Though they lived for a great deal in the frigid south and grew acclimated to it, the pox of the Minotaurs was too strong for even their hardy biology. Their community was too closely knit, and after the war ended, all of them caught the cough. Many of them became infertile, and with many of the men dead at the hands of the Horned Ones, the only remaining ones being infertile too, there has not been a new ogre baby in 36 years. Perhaps, though, the answers to their plight may lie west. So far, Predwin has got a bunch of different angles from this sort of orc uprising, and it really gives credence to sort of the political expansiveness of this setting. You get a lot of like really cool historical feeling and kind of epic myth feelings of, you know, people going to places and gathering other people and the uprising beginning, but then something new and too powerful comes along and takes them out, and then you end up with the vestiges of these once great people now sort of like left to slowly die out. It's really good stuff. It evokes all kinds of interesting imagery and feelings. For day 394, the prompt was, are there any animals with religious significance in your world? And this comes from Predwin the Great in the Discord. Predwin the Great writes, the Light Seekers, an entry in What Lies West. Glory be to all who would seek the light of his majesty, from most ignoble of goblin brigands to most supreme of living saints. But alas, for even them, they are not born his creatures, the ones who know his warmth, who never leave it even in darkness, who possess the power to fly into the very sight of heliomancy itself, to fly into the sun. Vicar Friedrich von Müller, Vicar of the Church of Orpheus. Light seekers, commonly known as moths, are believed by myself and others of the faith of Orpheus to be his angels. Moths flit through the land basking in his light during the day and flit around the effigies of his majesty during twilight, they being lanterns and torches, of course. As such, in their constant vigilance of light and endless pursuit of it, many of the heliomantic faith believe of them as representatives of Orpheus's presence. There are many kinds of moth, just as there are many kinds of mortal, and yet, despite all of their differences, despite all of their features, from horns of flesh to massive gleaming wings, all moths are guided by his light and constantly seek it. They are an example to us all, to unite in purpose and virtue. Glory be to his light seekers, to his moths. Such a fun idea for a creature with religious significance and it being a bug or an insect. I feel like I don't know of very many examples of this, like in real life. I guess maybe the scarab would be an example we have in real life, but you don't see it too often, and moths are a super cool one. Someone in the YouTube comments, when I read this aloud in the short form, had discussed this idea of like moth-eaten clothing being seen as sort of like a holy garb potentially, or seen as like someone who is beloved by Orpheus or by the light. Lots of cool directions you could go with this, with the moth and light motif. Kendamarania writes, The Rainbow Hippogriffs, an entry in Return to Feylund. Kendamarania prefaces this entry with a trigger warning for brief mentions of animal cruelty, as well as the following note. First mention of Korak, the extinct stone dwarves, and chronology of Feylund with the establishment of the Zoatic and Elven eras. Quite a lore drop for a fairy tale. The proper entry begins now. The rainbow hippogriffs are a group of legendary creatures revered by the talking animals of Feylund, primarily due to their relation to their primary deity, the trickster crow Korak. Their origin myth is often shared to nursery eggs and babies as a tale of strength and freedom, although like many other tales in the Zoatic era, the exact historicity of this story is disputed, since none of the hippogriffs have been spotted since the waning of the Elven era. Long before the elves all ascended, before even the Zoas ceased walking the earth, many different mythical beasts roamed the land. Among these were the rainbow hippogriffs, named as such due to their multicolored feathers that they would leave behind, with the head, talons, and wings of an eagle and the torso of a horse. They flew freely around the mountains and foothills with little care in the world, often pulling pranks on travelers with their ferocious caws that could be heard from miles away. One day, however, a new kingdom was established by the now extinct stone dwarves under the mountains, led by a cruel king. Enraged at the rainbow hippogriffs for disrupting his kingdom's peace, the dwarven king ordered that all the hippogriffs be captured at once and brought underground where they may be kept in captivity. With the king becoming married soon to a far-off dwarfen queen from another mountain, he thought it best that the hippogriffs be trained to be unwitting performers at his wedding, entertaining the guests with party tricks and letting them pluck their beautiful feathers as souvenirs. The rainbow hippogriffs were now slaves to the dwarven king, locked deep in the kingdom's dungeons and kept under close guard. They were whipped, humiliated, and withheld food if they couldn't do seemingly impossible acts such as fly through magical rings of fire or balancing swords on their beaks. It was around this time that the trickster crow Korak managed to beat Magic, one of the Zoa, in a game of riddles and steal the winds of language in a knapsack. Escaping from their hall in the stars, the crow was able to hear many troubles the legendary beasts were having, including the cries of the rainbow hippogriffs underground. Korak swiftly flew to the mountains and navigated through the labyrinthine tunnels that the dwarfs dug, at last finding the dungeon where they were held captive. He then opened his knapsack, and out came the air and dust of language to the hippogriffs. They all clamored their gratefulness to the wayward crow, but Korak saw at once the cruelty that the dwarf king inflicted upon them all. Perched on top of a sleeping stone dwarf, he advised the hippogriffs. Be silent for now, my brothers and sisters. The dwarf king will not be happy if he sees me here, and will order that my wings be clipped if he does. Play along with his game and be strong. The opportunity to escape will be at the wedding processional. Make the king know his place. I will be waiting for you all at the edge of the rain. So the hippogriffs endured another week of whipping and fire rings as a terrible storm brewed around the mountain. When the day finally came, every dwarf, mountain spirit, troll, and goblin came to visit and witness the royal wedding at the peak. The king wore his best rock cloak that he had while the hippogriffs were entertaining the guests, hiding their humanoid grunts. The bride then came, a beautiful sandstone dwarf whose moss beard was neatly braided with the veil. As the mountain spirits came with their wedding gifts, one of the hippogriffs finally made their move. Ape, the king's head is as smooth as polished stone, I say, it squawked out right in front of the bride. And he smells of elderberries and unicorn dung, another added. The hippogriffs all took turns insulting and belittling the king, revealing their power of speech to all of the guests with words they learned from Korak. The king then ordered his guards to behead each and every hippogriff at once and add them to the wedding dinner. Hearing this, the hippogriffs all flew out to the exit, leaving only a trail of feathers behind as they ascended into the sky. Following the storm clouds as rain poured over them, they heard Korak's call from above the clouds. He led the rainbow hippogriffs through the land of Feylund as they sang songs and ballads of their victory, with those below seeing them as a glorious, colorful arc emerging from the storm clouds. A lot of fun stuff in this one. Hopefully the bird-sounding voice was half decent there. I kind of just went with that one. I haven't done too much of that before, but I think it felt okay. I've always loved hippogriffs, like especially the first Narnia movie. Man, as a kid, I was like, those are so cool. I want to ride one of those so bad. I like these rainbow ones, that sort of shimmering. I can imagine these iridescent, shimmery feathers would make these beautiful wings. It's a really, really kind of cool mental image. Overall, a fun piece of like myth in this already sort of mythical, magical world from a very ancient time. You can kind of tell. For day 395, the prompt was, who is the weirdest person or people in your world? What are they up to? And are they crazy or just misunderstood? And this comes from Maple Me in the Discord. Prime the Great writes, Macus, Hierophant, Madman Supreme, an entry in Ichalon. Prewin prefaced the actual entry with this note. Not rewriting these makes me cringe a bit, but history is history, and I won't alter my own just because it suits my history. Macus is the only character from Ichalon that was only ever mentioned. Every single other character made at least one physical or audible appearance in the campaign, but that's probably only because Macus was already canonically dead by the time he was first mentioned. Or was he? No, he wasn't. I just sort of forgot about that plot point because I was a rookie DM, and then found his stat block 2 years after the campaign ended and went, oh yeah! Anyways, enjoy more Ichalon slop. The proper entry begins now. Macus Hierophant, one of the leaders of the esteemed Archiver Society of Mindnets. Macus is famed by his colleagues for being a professional lunatic, a man who goes out of his way to find the most grotesque, vile, and hostile monsters of Ichalon and its borders, preferably unnamed ones, so that he may, of course, name them himself. His names always follow a pattern, being something along the lines of Macus, whatever the name is. Macus says himself that this is so that the other members of his society know it was he who found such magnificent creatures, but apart from Macus himself, few would ever call his favorite monsters and animals anything short of horrifying. From shadow beings that siphon souls to monolithic hex beasts that could level mountains in a single step, Macus actively seeks out the most dangerous, most volatile monsters and personally examines them, most often while the beast is awake. So then, how does Macus survive? Simple, really. His insanity, his madness is so inhuman, his smile so foreign, his crazed eyes so quick, that most monsters, from tallest of husks to most wise of stalkers, fear him far more than he does them. They sense his confidence, his desire, and in his presence they often freeze. Other archivers call this witchcraft, arcane power, but those who actually bother to look closer will know the truth. Macus is infected with the power of no more, the eldritch god of madness, the fleeting wisps in his shadow, the dark presence following him everywhere, his glowing eyes in the dark. It is undeniable to those who are familiar with eldritch corruption. But despite this, Macus remains the most active and successful archiver in the entire world. His research has saved hundreds of thousands from encounters with the monsters of Ichalon, and it's likely, if it would have saved even more, if only he didn't pick the one monster immune to his corruption. A monster without mind that swallowed him whole and never even noticed it had. I feel like this is really probably exactly what we were thinking would come out of this prompt. It's these kind of crazy, wacky characters that most DMs end up putting in their games. I have a soft spot for really just goofy guys, goofy, weird, eccentric geniuses or researchers. So I empathize strongly with someone who has written something like this. Also, I feel like it's kind of fun. We can see Predwin has always really enjoyed this Eldritch stuff. It seems like it makes its way into everything that he touches, even these older projects that maybe he's not currently so proud of, but still kind of makes sense. You see a bit of a fingerprint from this person, kind of. The final day of prompts is day 396, but not the final set of entries, which I will explain to you once we get through these entries. The prompt for day 396 was, if one exists, what does the afterlife look like? And this came from NYUX in the Discord. NYUX wrote, The room. Everything just freezes, as if time itself stopped moving. As you stand up, you notice that every living creature around is gone. The crowd of people that had gathered around you to help all reduced to mere shadows on the ground. The street and the buildings all look the same, except you can't seem to recall what just happened. You don't feel any pain, nor do you really feel anything at all. It's just you and the place you were in just mere minutes ago. You're not quite sure what you should be feeling, but you know it's something. Pain, perhaps, but there's nothing. Your body is still there, as you can touch your hands together and feel them, but there's just something missing. You turn around and see a black door in the middle of the street. It wasn't there just a moment ago, right? You feel compelled to walk towards it, as if it's what you're meant to be doing. You glance back at the world behind you, feeling a strong, almost overwhelming sense of nostalgia. The sky remains blue, the buildings gray, and the streets black. But the doors on the buildings, their doors look almost different. You feel dread, looking at them as if you're not meant to be witnessing this, and you feel compelled to move back towards the black door. As you get closer, the sense of nostalgia becomes almost overwhelming. It almost feels like you're drowning in it. You struggle to move forward as the weight of nostalgia drags you back, but you eventually reach it. You go to open the door, but your hand passes through it, and everything suddenly fades to black like a snap. You get up as the nostalgia is suddenly gone. You look around and everything is just nothingness. It's less than darkness, since you can't even sense anything until what looks like a window in front of you opens up, flooding the room with a warm light, and then I like this uncertain ending. The if one exists, what does it look like? And you kind of tell us, but then kind of don't tell us. And we have this kind of fun depiction that NYUX supplied that I like a lot. Gives honestly the perfect vibe. LostInEternity writes, The Barrows, an entry in palimpsest. The Barrows are a lattice born of the Carandul, the mindscape, and you're weaving together, forming a realm of cold stone halls and ancient, indistinct statues serving as a home to the souls of the dead. It is a bridge for souls, and the lingering vestiges of people that cling to them in desperation to cross over into finality. However, most souls never get to see true finality, never reaching the great final rest spoken of in legend and doctrine, for Tarmukan is too burdened to guide them there, and their Totenfur are few when compared to the number of dead. With each passing moment, the barrows grow fuller and fuller, filled with the deceased who now spend their eternities wandering ancient halls of stone, waiting for the rest that they were promised. According to the beliefs of the Ordo, the barrows were once the domain of the ancient god of the dead, Daizamat. It is thought they became so full due to a rapid succession of calamities. Daizamat's death at the hands of the ancient god of the wind, the continued war between the god of combat and the god of fate, and then the dimness that ended the ancient past. With no god of death to govern passing, spirits accumulated, and Totenfur moved without clear direction. Even still, millennia later, Tarmukan and her followers exorcise the dead who roam outside the barrows, only adding to the ceaseless numbers that fill it. Really bleak description of an afterlife, honestly. I really kind of like the vibe that this gives, is sort of gothic, lost in an eternity of like kind of nothingness of stone halls, and the idea that there was once this great afterlife that everyone was going to get to, but now it'd be like winning the lottery if you actually got taken there. It's sort of sorrowful end of the world scenario almost, because of all these other things that have happened, leaving even the dead in a state of not being able to move on. Really kind of a fascinating piece, and like I said in the short form, it gives this feeling in this short amount of writing of kind of this expansive vastness to the world building and the history in a really solid way. Nugget writes, undiagnosed autism, also magic, probably the magic, an entry in time traveler, and the immortal. Victor Cogwin is the eldest of the Cogwin siblings, and he's always been interesting. He was always a little scientist at heart, always taking things apart and putting them back together. Always begging his father to take him to the World's Fair so that he could see the innovations of tomorrow. Always dreaming it would one day be him. And then, when he was 8, he started dreaming literally. Not quite of him presenting his great inventions at the World's Fair, but of smaller things, of visions of the past, of the future. Tell him what you told me. Victor hid behind his mother's skirt as he looked up at his father. Well, his father asked, a voice oddly soft for the man he had become over the years. What is it? Go on. I had a dream last night, Victor said quietly. His father's posture noticeably stiffened. About? He asked. Sand. When he was 10, he found himself clinging to the rafters. He didn't even know how he managed to get up there. How come you get to play up there? Ernest pouted. I'm actually trying to figure out how to get down from the ceiling. I have an idea. You don't even know what's going on either. I don't know if you can. Victor cut himself off, looking in the doorway. Justine had been passing by and stopped dead in the hallway to look at the scene before her. Don't get Dad, Victor said quickly. Justine paused for a moment before leaving. Mom! Victor's stuck to the ceiling! At least she isn't getting Dad? All right, Ernest, what's your idea? Ernest smiled before dragging a chair underneath Victor, where he climbed up and onto the backrest, arms splayed out for balance, before leaping from the chair to grab Victor by the ankle, a feat that knocked the chair over and pulled both boys down to the ground with a loud crash. Boys! Their mother scolded, running in the room, holding a baby with Justine at her skirt. What the blazes are you doing? Nix, mutter, Victor mumbled. When he was 14, he went to the circus. He loved the circus. He couldn't think of anyone who didn't. He watched in awe at the various acts, at the trapeze artists, at the animal tamers, at the fire spinners, but the greatest act of the circus to many were the freaks. Absolute aberrations of nature put on display for the audience to gawk at and take solace in the knowledge that they aren't like that. Such creatures like bearded ladies or twins stuck together, men half the height they should be. Entertainment. Victor watched, unblinkingly, at the horrendous display of the worst of humanity in the ring. He couldn't take his eyes off it. How many of these people would die at the hands of someone like my father if they weren't so profitable? Victor took a bite of the caramel apple he had been working through the entire show, still not taking his eyes off the freaks. His trance was broken by a tugging at his arm. He looked over and saw William, his youngest brother, only 3 years old now, gesturing to the apple. Victor laughed. "I think you're a bit too young to eat a candy apple properly," he said. "Besides, it's mine." He looked back down at the apple to find it whole. He was sure he had been eating it. The coating was still stuck to his teeth. He had definitely been taking bites out of it unless it rewound. Wouldn't be the first time something like this had happened. Maybe I am a freak. When he was 18, he had distanced himself as far as he could from witches and magic. If magic doesn't exist, then he couldn't possibly be ill. Science would answer everything. He entered university early, studying physics and engineering, something that would help his skills as an inventor. He sat at the dinner table with the rest of his family, scribbling down various thoughts and ideas onto a notebook as he ate. He mostly tuned out whatever his father was discussing with the rest of his siblings, something about witch-finding and his retirement. Victor didn't want to hear it. Ernest leaned over to Victor. "Schilling says I can hit his forehead with a potato from here," he whispered. Victor looked towards the head of the table towards his father, then to the piece of potato on Ernest's fork. "Do it." Ernest grinned before pulling the fork back like a catapult and launching the potato slice across the table, landing directly on Phineas's shoulder. The room went quiet. Phineas even more so, as he looked down at the table at his children and to Ernest still holding the fork upright. "Ernest?" "Yeah?" Phineas tried to find words, but none seemed to come. He brushed the potato from his shoulder and quietly stood up to leave. "Impressive," Victor said. "I think I would have gotten another black eye if I tried." "Didn't get the forehead, though," Ernest said, defeated. "Another 5 degrees and you would have made it." "Really?" "No idea." "Why did you do that?" Edwin asked hesitantly. "If I asked you, you'd have said no," Ernest explained. By 23, Victor had been closer to the World's Fair than ever. He practically lived at the university now, anything to avoid going home. Joseph Swan had already left. He was alone in the classroom, working on his pride and joy, the light bulb, an electric lamp to provide light without fire. He had the feeling it would change the world. He checked his watch. Mostly habit at this point, for he knew the time instinctively. He finished his checks on the lamp, on the fuses on the wires before running his final test. He turned it on with bated breath. It exploded. Well, maybe not exploded, but certainly caught fire with force. Pieces of it had still launched across the room where it caught other things on fire, but what's a new idea without a few classrooms set on fire? He was expelled. An overreaction. If you ask him, he wasn't even allowed to go back and get the notes he left behind. Jealous. Jealous, the lot of them. It wasn't supposed to do that, Victor admitted later to his father. He was met with silence. He continued. "I just need to run a few more tests. I think I know what went wrong. I can make it better the next time." "There isn't going to be a next time." Well, sure there is. Failure is just learning. What matters is trying again. I almost have it. I just need my notes. You won't need your notes. I mean, I suppose I don't need them, but it'd certainly make things easier as I'd be able to avoid the errors I already learned from. Your place isn't at the university, Victor. It's as a witchfinder. What? Victor felt dread rising in his throat. The family business, Victor. Like I've been raising you to be your whole life. No, I can't, Victor pleaded. He couldn't be a witchfinder. He just couldn't stomach it. Please, Father, don't make me do this. It is settled. You'll be taking over for me in the next few months. This is not up for discussion. Got a pretty big chunk of Victor's background, sort of pre-time travel, but also not because of, time travel. There's this strange jovial nature to the family despite the bad father, which is this really interesting brightness sort of against everything else that Victor experiences later in life. I really like the sort of contrast that is being played with there. And it's sweet, at the very least, that Victor, not everything was all bad. His mother seemed to be kind, and his siblings seemed to love him. Kendamarania writes, Flight of the Afterlife, an entry in Return to Faelund. Kendamarania writes, Flight of the Afterlife, an entry in Return to Faelund. Faelund is a land full of ghosts and spirits, for the silent masked wisps to the various nature spirits inhabiting the forests, seas, and mountains. There seems to be no afterlife in Faelund because of this. However, it's rumored that it wasn't always like this. Indeed, there have been many tales of an afterlife once existing in the land before it was unshackled by the Zoa. In the Zoatic era, the days before days, life flourished under the four gods. Each and every race was crafted from the flesh and organs of reason and given the capacity to grow and evolve. However, there was one major flaw with their design. Their bodies were fragile, easily able to be torn, and chewed by hungry beasts or broken by the elements. With their pure magic embedded in their breaths, every fae began to manifest souls conceptually indestructible due to being part of the tidings of magic. The dead fae all began to flood the developing land, and as a temporary solution, the Zoa of Life collected the souls of the dead and placed them in an underwater vault deep in the sea. Life became deeply ashamed of this act, as she considered every fae under the twin moons to be her children. Additionally, their prison was the closest thing the fae had ever encountered to oblivion, the jaws of nothingness gnashing their souls. The dead's wails echoed for several months, awakening the abyssal jelly serpent Meduslid. It called to life to return to the deep sea and deal with her afterlife problem, lest it surface and cause a flood on land. I could not sleep for 50 days and nights, for the cries of your puny fleshlings do nothing but shake the sea floor. Can't you return your children to the land? Meduslid begged life. If they aren't accounted for, they will flood the realm, replied Life, her radiant light shining amidst the midnight ocean, and they will bring you down with it, for they know nothing but permanence and immortality. They never want to leave this realm. Meduslid then argued, Then let them stay. They can inhabit the clouds and air, the forested trees and bushes, the mountains, hills, and valleys, for all I care. They may even share the dominion with me in the waves and seas. And Life took this to heart. Feeling great pity for the trapped fae, trapped underground, with a singular lift of her finger she unlocked the underworld and set the souls of the dead free in flight. With this, they were able to roam the land unshackled into their own desire, becoming one with the winds of magic and the blanket of earth. It is said that the dead have since embedded their spirits into everything that lays still, including the inanimate objects and phenomenon listed by Meduslid. Almost all variations of religion in Faelund are animistic because of this, believing the dead walk amongst the living in nature. When one connects to magic, they can tap to the ancestor Fae, who dances with life and fleets at concepts like time and mortality. Those who have only recently passed, or angered spirits, such as the Straw Kids, will find themselves still bound with a physical form, not quite ready to become one with the realm. I like this mythological back and forth that we kind of get, this decision that finally results in the metaphysics that are seen now in Return to Faelund, and I think it's really, really well done. Starting this episode, we will begin to end off World Hammer episodes with a section I'm calling Hammer Sparks, the name coming from LostInEternity, who recommended Sparks, and the idea coming from Predwin, who sort of desired to have some stuff read aloud that wasn't in line with the prompts because he sort of had a different focus. And I like this idea a lot. So there will be 3 sort of empty first come first serve slots at the end of every episode where any world builder who would like to submit something can do so. And it can be, on any topic, on anything that they're currently interested in writing that doesn't align with any of the current prompts for that 2-week gap. Our first ever Hammer Sparks entry and the last entry of this episode is from Predwin the Great, and he writes, Monsters of the West, Goodfellows, an entry in What Lies West.
The Goodfellows. Nice breath of fresh air asking about them instead of whatever horrors.
What?
Oh, yeah, sorry. They're cute. Yeah, that's it. What else do you want me to say? They're green. No. Wait, they're blue, actually, I think. Well, you're useless too, you blue cloak four-eyed
Gertz, Rib Mangler, an adventurer. Call signs: Detect Good, Chirps, Rock Cairns. Goodfellows are small, beloved monsters of the West that reside within both the True Desert and the Shattered Divide. Though they remain incredibly rare in the former, Goodfellows, named by adventurer Marcus Crawler for their cheering appearance, are small, 2-foot-tall insects with hardened, buckler-shaped shells covering them like a parasol. They possess blue-green shells that shine under the light of the tyrannical sun. Their little legs poke just shyly out from their shelves, their eyes small beacons of white light that pierce the fog of their common home. Goodfellows are drawn to the heavy footfalls of well-equipped adventurers. They run up to their feet with alarming but whimsical speed before tilting their heads up to ensure the adventurer is, indeed, well-armed. If a Goodfellow isn't happy with what they see, they will make several low clicks before running back off to their crevice, and the adventurer won't see any more Goodfellows until they take a shower, suggesting some kind of pheromone is at play. But if a Goodfellow likes what it sees, 5 or more adventurers with scars on their faces, blood-covered weapons, and the smell of arcane power, they will begin to chirp rapidly, causing even more Goodfellows to emerge from their holes. The Goodfellows will then circle the party or lone adventurer for a short time as 3 of their own number run off to scout. Adventurers report that first experiences with a swarm of Goodfellows can be intimidating, but that eventually it becomes clear they mean absolutely no harm. Eventually, the scouting Goodfellows will return with one of 2 sounds. One, a shrill, almost childlike scream, though resembling one of the excitement rather than fear or pain. The other, the same low chirp as when they are disappointed with the kit of an adventurer. If the latter happens, many of the Goodfellows will lower their antennas in disappointment and retreat to their dens, though it is important to note in this instance that the group of adventurers may still encounter further groups of Goodfellows. A small handful of Goodfellows may continue following the party for a short while, particularly if one among the adventurers' number has pet them at all or given them treats. The former noise, however, will cause the Goodfellows to begin running off in the direction the scouting bugs came from. They will frequently turn back to ensure that their party of choice is still following them as they guide them across the metal bridges and past the towering monoliths of graviturgy glyphs. A wise party will follow a group of Goodfellows, as it means nothing short of fortune. The Goodfellows will guide the party to the den of a wormling. The entrances are usually on the underside of the floating islands within the Shattered Divide, making them impossible for the average party to find, but the Goodfellows are good for finding smaller caves that happen to lead straight to a den. Saving the specifics for their own archive, a wormling den is often full of ancient relics and gold. Needless to say, the parts of a wormling themselves sell for a high price to alchemists. Sometimes it's a false lead, though, and a group of Goodfellows will lead to an empty, previously inhabited but already looted cave. Still, sometimes a relic or two has been left behind. So then, what do the Goodfellows get out of this arrangement? Simple. The flesh of the wormling, ideally. The muscle and organs of a wormling are charged with magic, which the Goodfellows actively seek to sustain themselves, and a wormling just so happens to be big enough for a sizable colony to feast to satiation. Adventurers will often take an immediate rest after felling a wormling, and as they sit, the cheerful little bugs will round up and deliver individual scales and other inedible bits to their feeders. So then, the main question, who taught them to do this? Well, that remains unknown. Since the first encounter with Goodfellows, they have always acted this way, always guiding adventurers to treasure and the beasts guarding it. Some stories say the Goodfellows can be found anywhere, but confirmed reports from credible parties have only come from the Divide and the True Desert. Finally, the nature of their true biology. Goodfellows are certainly, without a doubt, Fae. Their flesh is an inky black void. Their eyes are shapes of white light that change with their emotions, bowing into upside-down U's when they're happy, and separating into little dots when they're sad. They don't prompt reaction from spells that target only evil creatures, such as the Knights in Yellow or Death Knights, and though they are certainly kind, they are not angels, and yet the spell detect good and evil detects them just fine. Whatever the case, they remain cherished monsters of the West. If, for some ungodly reason, you have chosen to attack a Goodfellow, they are weak creatures and die easily. But there are absolutely no reasons to attack them, as their shells are worthless and their flesh disintegrates upon death. The smell of a dead Goodfellow on a person's hands also activates the wrath of chromatic sentinels, making it an even more foolish decision other than wasting time. Finally, it unleashes an arcane mark onto their killer, warning other Goodfellows to their nature forever, at least until a Dispel Curse spell is used. Goodfellows are in the middle of the food chain within the Divide. They cannot be eaten, but that doesn't stop some creatures from trying anyways, such as spectotums. Most small critters fall prey to Goodfellows, though, and of course they utilize adventurers to bring down larger monsters. A good friend of mine, that's a fellow DM and world builder, really likes mimics for the idea, the evolutionary and speculative biology concept of a world made of adventurers would inevitably result in a creature that adapts specifically to target such creatures. If you have places in your world that people are continually going and a specific kind of person, then something would develop a way to interact with them that would benefit it. And I feel like this is a really good example of that. And we've actually seen a few of the other monsters in What Lies West also interact in this very dynamic ecological way that I think Predwin is really starting to master with this setting, and I'm excited to read some more monsters and maybe some more unique entries from him and whoever else decides to end up writing some Hammer Sparks for us in the future. This brings us to the end of episode 6. Thank you for listening, and may your world never be lost in the fires of the forge of the World Hammer.